For Thor and the Thunder Bride we sing. She's strong and she's mighty, a glorious thing.
There are many ways to start a saga. Some begin with blood. Some begin with love. Some begin with a very long description of a mountain you don't care about. This one, however, begins with a sneeze. Yes, a sneeze. Thor, god of thunder, defender of Asgard, slayer of giants, and owner of the most impressive beard in 9 realms, had caught a cold. Not a metaphoric cold, not a poetic one, but an actual, snot-dripping, nose-sniffling cold. And while mortals can survive such indignities with tissues and soup, when Thor sneezes, the walls shake, the mead sloshes, and at least 3 villages in Midgard file noise complaints with Odin's secretary. So, one sneeze later, Mjolnir, the hammer that never misses, never rests, never betrays its owner, went flying. Not flying majestically to strike an enemy, flying. No, oops, Butterfingers, flying. Straight to the Golden Hall, narrowly missing Sif's hair, which, for the record, is still a sensitive subject after the last time Loki got involved with it, bounced off a shield, ricocheted off a statue of Odin, and then it disappeared. Vanished, like a sock in a cosmic laundry machine. Thor blinked, sniffled, and said the words every Asgardian has learned to fear. "Where's my hammer? Now, let's pause here. You and I both know that misplacing Mjolnir is basically step 1 in the recipe book for disaster stew. Step 2 is usually Loki shows up, and right on cue, the trickster god himself materialized in the doorway, already grinning like he'd been rehearsing for this moment his entire life. "My dear brother-in-law," Loki purred, "I couldn't help but notice your hammer has relocated." Thor sniffled again, eyes narrowing. "Loki, what did you do?" "Me?" Loki gasped, hand on heart, eyes wide with theatrical innocence. "Why do you always assume it's me?" "Because it usually is." The truth is, Loki hadn't touched Mjolnir this time. Not yet. But he was certainly not about to waste an opportunity that had landed in his lap like a gift from the Norns themselves. "I simply came to offer my services," Loki said smoothly. "Tracking down lost property, solving mysteries, untangling divine embarrassments. Why? It's practically my calling." Thor growled. "Mjolnir is not lost property. It is my hammer." "And yet," Loki smirked, "you don't know where it is?" Meanwhile, the rest of Asgard had noticed. Heimdall sighed, so loudly it rattled the gates. Frigg shook her head and muttered something about raising children better. Odin just pinched the bridge of his nose and reached for the mead, because if there was one thing he hated more than giants, it was Loki plus Thor plus missing hammer. Destiny, for its part, scribbled in the margins. Incident number 1, hammer misplaced due to sneeze. Prophecy not thrilled. Thor naturally decided the best course of action was brute force. He stomped through the halls, bellowing at servants, demanding anyone who saw a flying hammer report immediately. This led to several contradictory accounts. One swore it had flown toward the kitchens, another swore it was seen near the stables, and one poor warrior claimed it had landed in a stew, though he admitted he might have been drunk. Loki, of course, fanned the chaos like a gossip columnist with divine credentials. "Oh, I heard it's in Jotunheim. Giants love shiny things." Or perhaps Helheim, always dropping by uninvited, those dead. He even suggested, with a straight face, that perhaps Mjolnir had simply grown tired of Thor's sneezing and decided to elope with more hygienic owner. Thor did not laugh. So, by the time the moon rose, the situation was clear. Mjolnir was missing. Again. Loki was plotting. Again. And Asgard was holding its collective breath, waiting for the next disaster to arrive. Because with Thor hammerless, even the goats pulling his chariot looked nervous. And far away, in the frostbitten halls of Jotunheim, a giant with more muscles and manners leaned over a table and grinned. Because sometimes destiny doesn't wait for you to find trouble. Sometimes it steals your hammer, ties a bow around it, and sets the stage for 24 more parts of this ridiculous saga. Thor was furious. Not storm clouds on the horizon furious. Not even who ate the last dumpling furious. He was Mjolnir is missing, and Loki is smirking furious. The kind of fury that makes entire realms consider early hibernation just to avoid eye contact. He stomped around the golden hall like an earthquake dressed in armor, sneezing occasionally, while terrified servants dug for cover. Each sneeze carried a crack of lightning that scorched ceiling beams and left black streaks across the marble floor. Every time lightning struck, another Asgardian shouted, "Check under the table," because apparently they believed the most powerful weapon in the 9 realms could be misplaced like a sandal after a feast. Spoiler, it was not under the table. Unless the table had suddenly learned to conceal divine weapons between leftover dumplings and spilled mead, Mjolnir was very much gone. And through all this, Loki followed behind Thor at a leisurely pace, hands clasped behind his back, whistling a jaunty little tune that sounded suspiciously like, "You're doomed without me." He even did little skips between steps, because if you can't enjoy your brother's meltdown, what's the point of having a brother at all? Finally, Loki tilted his head, the grin already stretching wider than was strictly healthy. "Thor," he said, "have you considered the possibility that the hammer simply left?" Thor froze mid-sniffle. His eyes narrowed. "What?" "You know," Loki gestured vaguely at the sky. "Ran away. Abandoned you. Sought greener pastures. After all, hammers get tired too. Always smashing, smashing, smashing. Perhaps Mjolnir just needed a vacation." Thor's face twisted in horror. "Hammers don't take vacations." "Tell that to your missing one," Loki said sweetly. He leaned closer, voice dropping into mock sympathy. "Maybe it just needed a break from you. All that shouting, all that sneezing. Honestly, you're a lot." Thor's jaw dropped. His beard practically quivered with indignation. Servants backed away even further, preparing for the inevitable storm. Meanwhile, Heimdall, who had the misfortune of both perfect hearing and eternal vigilance, stood at the edge of the bifrost. His golden eyes scanned the realms, but his ears, alas, were trapped in Asgard. He sighed and announced, in a voice that carried both authority and the weariness of someone forced to watch endless sibling drama, "Mjolnir has not crossed the bridge." He might as well have said, "Still stuck babysitting your nonsense." "Then where is it?" Thor bellowed, his sneeze punctuating the question with a bolt of lightning that nearly fried an innocent tapestry of Odin hunting elk. Heimdall raised a perfect eyebrow. Seriously, it was an eyebrow so sharp it could slice through excuses. "That," he said slowly, "is the question, isn't it? Now, you might imagine Thor would take the sensible route here. Retrace his steps, investigate the last place he remembered holding Mjolnir. Maybe even ask the dwarves if they had installed a recall hammer feature when they forged it. But no, rationality, and Thor rarely exchanged holiday cards. Instead, his thunderous brain landed on the most obvious culprit, Loki. In one swift movement, Thor grabbed Loki by the collar, lifted him 3 feet off the ground, and growled, "Give it back." "Thor," Loki croaked, still somehow smiling like he'd won the lottery. "If I had it, don't you think I'd already be charging rent? Imagine it. Mjolnir, available for hourly smiting. Rates negotiable. Family discount not included." Thor blinked. It was a fair point. Loki never hoarded power without flaunting it. If he'd taken Mjolnir, Asgard would already be buried under fireworks, scams, and terrible theme songs. And yet, suspicion never really left Thor's mind. Because Loki, in the corner, Sif rubbed her temples. She'd seen this play before. It always ended with Thor chasing Loki through courtyards, breaking 3 statues and terrifying the goats. She inhaled deeply, braced herself, and stepped in. "Thor," she said firmly, "perhaps someone else took it." Thor turned, eyes blazing. "Someone else?" "Yes," Sif said patiently. "There are giants, remember? Giants who love humiliating you." Thor's beard bristled. The word giants hit him like a slap. He had, in fact, forgotten about them. Possibly because his head was stuffed with sneeze, and possibly because it was easier to blame Loki than admit he had actual enemies. Giants stealing Mjolnir wasn't just possible. It was practically tradition. And somewhere in Jotunheim, a frost giant sneezed from the sheer force of narrative foreshadowing. But Loki wasn't done. He leaned closer to Thor, lowering his voice into a theatrical whisper that could have earned him a medal in suspense delivery. Of course it could be someone closer. Someone who knows you well. Someone who looks very good in golden hair. Loki! Thor roared, raising Mjolnir. Oh wait, he couldn't, because it was still missing. Instead, he grabbed the nearest object, a roasted chicken, which, unfortunately, lacked the same level of intimidation. Sif's patience snapped. She reached for the nearest weapon. Turns out it was a frying pan, and hurled it at Loki. Loki ducked effortlessly, of course he did, and the pan clanged against Thor's elbow instead. Thor yelped, sneezed, and let out a burst of lightning so violent it fried half the ceiling beams. Sparks rained down. Half the feast benches collapsed. The goats outside fainted dramatically, as though they had been rehearsing for this moment their entire lives. Destiny, watching from somewhere smug and invisible, sighed and scribbled in its cosmic ledger. Incident number 2, hammer still missing. Domestic drama escalating. Goat insurance recommended. By the end of the night, 3 things were painfully clear. 1, Mjolnir was missing. 2, everyone suspected Loki anyway. 3, Loki was absolutely going to use this mess to his advantage. And far away in Jotunheim, the frost giant THRYM, muscle-bound, frost-browed, and smug in a way only villains with stolen property can be, tightened his grip on something heavy, glowing, and very, very smug. Yes, Mjolnir was in his hands. And yes, he was already rehearsing bad poetry about weddings. Because giants, unlike hammers, do take vacations. Specifically, vacations into other people's misery. Thor paced the golden hall like a thundercloud with legs. His footsteps boomed against the marble, rattling goblets and shaking banners as though Asgard itself feared his temper. His sneezes, unpredictable and violent, shook the rafters until dust drifted down like embarrassed snow. His scowl was so fierce that servants abandoned trays mid-step and pressed themselves against the walls, whispering quiet prayers that the god of thunder wouldn't sneeze in their direction. And every time he muttered, "Where is my hammer?" the goats outside brayed nervously, stamping their hooves as though rehearsing their own tragic funeral dirge. Thor's mood had not improved since sunrise. He had spent the morning pacing the courtyard, demanding answers from terrified servants and suspiciously silent birds. At one point, he even accused a tree of looking guilty. By the time he stormed back into the hall, cheeks flushed, hair wild, and beard bristling with static, everyone in Asgard knew one thing for certain. Though without Mjolnir it was like Odin without wisdom, Loki without sarcasm, or goats without fainting. Simply unnatural. Finally, Loki, who had been lounging on a bench the entire time, polishing his grin instead of any actual weapon, clapped his hands together with exaggerated enthusiasm. "All right, brother-in-law," he announced, stretching each word as though it were his own invention. "Let's solve this mystery. Clearly, you need me." Thor stopped pacing. The storm cloud paused mid-boom. His eyes narrowed into slits, lightning crackling faintly in the air. "Why?" he asked slowly. "Would I need you?" Loki leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his grin widening like a trap, ready to spring. "Because," he said smoothly, "I am clever, devious, and excellent at locating missing property. Whereas you—" He gestured vaguely at Thor's massive shoulders, bulging arms, and general air of destructive capability, "are very good at smashing things you can actually find. Which, right now, is not your hammer." Thor opened his mouth to roar denial, then closed it again with a noise halfway between a growl and a sneeze. Deep down, very, very deep down, buried under several layers of pride, stubbornness, and mead, he knew Loki was right. Don't worry, he would never admit it aloud. But the truth itched at him worse than chainmail in summer. Sif, who had been standing nearby with arms folded like a queen judging a pair of squabbling children, raised a brow. "Loki, what's your angle?" "Angle?" Loki gasped theatrically, pressing a hand to his chest. "Me? I have no angle. I simply want to help Thor retrieve his precious hammer, restore Asgard's honor, and maybe cause a tiny amount of chaos along the way." "Too honest," muttered Heimdall from the doorway, his golden eyes gleaming. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen this play 1,000 times and was already bored of the ending. Loki ignored him. "Here's the plan. I'll go to Jotunheim. Disguise myself, of course. Giants are allergic to honesty, so I'll blend right in. I'll snoop around, see if anyone has suddenly acquired a suspiciously thunderous paperweight. Thor slammed a fist onto the feasting table, sending cutlery leaping in terror. No, I'll go to Jotunheim myself. Thor, Loki sighed, tilting his head in mock pity. You are, how shall I put this? Subtle as an avalanche in a pottery shop. The moment you set foot there, they'll know you're hammerless. And then, well, have you ever tried fighting giants without Mjolnir? Thor sneezed violently. Lightning forked outside, rattling the stained glass windows. Yes, he admitted grudgingly, wiping his nose on his sleeve. It went poorly. Exactly, Loki said, spreading his hands as if he had just solved all the world problems. So let me handle this. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, why would anyone in their right mind trust Loki? And the answer is, they didn't. Odin, Sif, Heimdall, Frigg, even the goats outside exchanged looks that said in perfect unison, this is a terrible idea. But Asgard had run out of better ones. The hammer was gone, the frost giants were smug, and the only thing worse than Loki running the plan was Loki being bored without one. So Loki left. He donned a feathered cloak that shimmered like midnight oil, borrowed, of course, without permission, from Freya's collection. It's for the good of Asgard, he said, ignoring her shouted threats from across the hall. With a dramatic sweep, he transformed, feathers unfurling into black wings, his body shrinking, twisting, reshaping until a raven rose where a man had stood. He flapped once, twice, then soared into sky, a sliver of shadow slicing across the dawn. Meanwhile, Thor stayed behind. He tried to meditate, but Thor's version of meditation involved pacing aggressively and glaring at anyone who dared breathe too loudly. He sneezed so often that sparks danced along the walls. Servants began wearing helmets indoors. The goat stable caught fire twice before Sif doused it with a bucket of snow. Destiny, who had by now given up on subtlety, scribbled in its ledger, Incident number 3, Asgard considering fireproof wallpaper. Now let us cut away, because sagas love dramatic crosscuts, to Jotunheim, a land of endless frost, jagged peaks stabbing the sky, and valleys where even echoes refuse to linger for fear of frostbite. Here, giants rule with fists like glaciers and manners that could curdle milk. Subtlety had never been invited to Jotunheim, and even if it had been, it would have frozen solid on the doorstep. Inside a hall carved from glacier and bone, a particularly large frost giant sat at a table big enough to serve as an airstrip. His name was Ticharwam, and his hobbies included breaking mountains, composing truly terrible poetry, and occasionally brushing snow from his beard with an icicle. On the table before him rested something heavy, gleaming faintly with divine smugness. Yes, Mjolnir. Ticharwam stroked his chin, his fingers leaving streaks of frost across the pale skin stretched tight over a jaw that could double as a cliffside. Each thoughtful stroke released little crystals that fluttered down like snowflakes, except much sharper and far less whimsical. What a fine hammer, he rumbled at last, his voice echoing through the glacial hall, like a drumbeat too slow for mortals to hear. Strong, shiny, perfect for smashing things, and also for wedding gifts. Now pause. Did you hear that correctly? Yes, wedding gifts. Don't worry, dear listener. We will absolutely circle back to that particular lunacy in a moment, because it deserves the kind of attention usually reserved for natural disasters and regrettable tattoos. For now, let us focus on Ticharwam's expression. Imagine, if you will, a grin wider than a fjord, wider than freshly fallen snow, and colder than the silence after someone says, "Let's hear Tim's poetry." It was the grin of a giant already lost in fantasy. He pictured himself standing before the Frost Giant Council, Mjolnir clutched in one hand, a bride shackled politely at his side. Songs would be sung, feasts would be thrown. Every cousin, uncle, and great-grandniece would envy him. He would compose ballads, bad ones, naturally, comparing himself to storms and his bride to delicate snowdrifts. Spoiler, no one wanted these ballads, but when has that ever stopped a frost giant? Truly, Ticharwam was drunk on his own imagination, intoxicated not by me but by ego. Meanwhile, back in the golden halls of Asgard, a very different scene unfolded. Thor sneezed. Again, the rafters groaned as though Thor's sinuses had declared war on structural integrity, a tapestry depicting one of his greatest victories. A battle where he had once hurled a mountain into the sea, just to impress a seagull, slipped from his hook and landed on the floor with a pitiful sigh. "I hate waiting," Thor muttered, clenching his fist so tightly that sparks leapt between his knuckles like tiny fireworks, announcing his impatience to the world. Sif approached him cautiously, the way one approaches a bear who has stubbed its toe. "Thor," she said gently, her tone halfway between soothing and exasperated, "you must trust Loki this time." Thor turned toward her with the look of a man who had just been offered soup without salt. "Trust Loki? That's like trusting frost not to be cold, or trusting me not to sneeze." And right on cue, ACHO, lightning cracked. Another vase shattered somewhere in the palace. A servant screamed. Business as usual. Sif, to her eternal credit, tried again. She placed a steadying hand on his arm, ignoring the faint static shock that made her hair stand on end. Perhaps, but sometimes even frost warms the earth when it melts. Thor blinked, his bushy brows furrowing. "Are you saying Loki is frost?" Sif sighed and withdrew her hand. "Forget it. Now let us shift our view." Because above the jagged cliffs of Jotunheim, a raven circled in the frigid air. Its feathers shimmered with an oily blackness that caught the pale moonlight. And if one looked closely, one might notice that this was no ordinary raven. This raven's eyes glimmered green with mischief, and its beak curved in a grin that really should have been impossible for birds. Yes, Loki had arrived, perched high upon the remains of an ancient chandelier. Don't ask how it got there. Giant are notoriously bad at interior decoration. Loki surveyed the scene. His sharp eyes caught every detail. The cracked towers leaning like drunken sentinels. The smoke curling up from forges where giants argued over whether a hammer was better for smashing or for cooking. The vast, icy hall where THRYM sat stroking his chin and daydreaming of weddings. Loki's raven grin widened. He had found the hammer. The question now was not if, but how? How to steal it without becoming raven soup. Below him, giants were bickering loudly. One shouted about dinner portions. Another demanded a new axe because his old one had been accidentally swallowed by his cousin's dog. A third was engaged in a passionate debate about whether snow tasted better fresh or salted. Spoiler, salted. Everything tastes better salted, except Loki's cooking. Loki rolled his glowing green eyes. Truly, he thought, these creatures are allergic to intelligence. Then THOM's booming voice rose above the chaos, shaking frost from the rafters. "I will not give back the hammer," he declared with all the pomp of man announcing he had invented cheese. "Not unless the gods pay me proper tribute. Not unless they give me Freya for my bride." The hall erupted in approving roars. Giants pounded the tables with their fists. Ale sloshed from mugs and froze midair, shattering into frosty shards. The air itself trembled with anticipation. Mjolnir, resting smugly behind THRYM, hummed faintly, its power restrained but restless, as though it longed to leap into Thor's hands and end this farce. Loki nearly laughed so hard he toppled off his chandelier perch. Freya? Marry THRYM? Oh, this was too rich. He pictured her reaction. Flames, daggers, possibly turning THRYM into an ice sculpture. Thor, on the other hand, would sneeze himself into oblivion when he heard. The entertainment value alone was worth the risk of raven soup. And somewhere, far across the 9 realms in the golden halls of Asgard, Thor did sneeze, so loudly that a vase shattered 3 rooms away. Coincidence? Or destiny giggling behind its sleeve? You decide. Thor paced. Loki schemed. THRYM dreamed. And somewhere in the shadows, destiny sharpened its quill, preparing to scribble the most ridiculous wedding invitation in history. Because everyone knows, if giants are plotting, if Loki is listening, and if Thor is missing his hammer, then the saga is only just beginning. And dear listener, let me assure you, this wedding will not end with happily ever after. Flying across the icy winds of Jotunheim, Loki muttered to himself, feathers slicing the cold air. Find hammer. Don't get eaten. Maybe cause light mischief along the way. Honestly, for him, that was restraint. If you know Loki, and I suspect you do, you'll understand that light mischief is his version of self-control. The storm winds howled like wolves as he glided over jagged peaks, valleys carved from ancient ice, and glaciers that shone with their own sickly blue light. To most, this land was a death sentence. To Loki, it was simply a stage, and he was already preparing his entrance. He landed outside a frost giant hall so massive it could double as a mountain. If mountains enjoyed drinking contests, and occasionally threw chairs through their own windows, the structure loomed, built from blocks of ice thicker than city walls, with jagged tusks jutting from its gate like the teeth of some sleeping beast. Smoke belched from chimneys, carrying the smell of charred meat and poor life choices. From inside came roars of laughter, clashing tankards, and at least 3 off-key voices attempting a drinking song about punching the sun. Subtlety, Loki thought, would be crucial. Naturally, he waltzed in. The hall was chaos personified. Giants bellowed songs that could crack glaciers. Bones littered the floor, mostly from meals, but possibly from neighbors who lost at arm wrestling. Pillars of carved ice sweated under the heat of 100 torches, dripping steadily into puddles that giants ignored. Every table sagged under roasted oxen, barrels of mead, and the occasional arm wrestling contest. And there at the head of the feast table sat Teacher Wham. Teacher Wham, dear listener, was a marvel of proportions. The thickest neck in Jotunheim, wider than some bridges. Shoulders broad enough to use fjords as shawls. A brain-to-bicep ratio so pitiful one could only marvel at the god's sense of humor. His beard was tangled with crumbs and frost, and his hands, those colossal clumsy hands, rested on something shining at his side. Something very hammer-shaped. Loki's grin stretched so wide it nearly split his raven beak. "Found you," he whispered to himself. "But remember, Loki never rushes. A thief steals, a liar deceives, but Loki, he orchestrates. He waits, observes, then chooses the most annoying way to proceed." So instead of darting from Mjolnir, he swept forward with exaggerated grace, bowed deeply, feathers rustling, and said, "Great Teacher Wham, most magnificent, most terrifying, breaker of mountains, scourge of boulders everywhere, an unchallenged champion of staring contests with glaciers, I bring greetings from Asgard." The hall went quiet for half a heartbeat before erupting in laughter. A raven talking? A raven bowing? Of course it was Loki. Even the giants weren't that dense. Teacher Wham leaned closer, his breath like frozen onions left too long in a cellar. Asgard? What do they want? More broken bones? More storms in their soup? Loki put on his sweetest smile, which, if you've ever seen it, is more unsettling than a wolf licking its chops. "Actually," he purred, "I've come to discuss arrangements." Teacher Wham's eyes glinted. He leaned even closer, so close that frost began to crust the feathers on Loki's cloak. "Then you know my price. And here, dear listener, comes the twist sagas were practically invented for. Because Teacher Wham had indeed stolen Mjolnir, but not to smash Asgard, not to barter for mountains of gold, not even to ignite another age-old war. No. Teacher Wham had a simpler plan, one only a frost giant could consider reasonable. "I will return the hammer," Teacher Wham declared proudly, pounding the table so hard a roasted boar slid into someone's lap, "if Freya agrees to marry me." Pause. Dramatic effect. Let's allow this to settle in your mind. Yes, you heard correctly. Marriage. To Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and war. The one who could summon armies with a tear, burn halls with a glare, and who had absolutely zero patience for giants. Loki blinked, then tilted his head. "You want to marry Freya?" Teacher Wham slammed a fist on the table again, this time splintering the wood and rattling the bones so hard a skull bounced into someone's drink. "Aye. No hammer returned until she is mine. Then we feast. Then we wed." The giants cheered. Cups clanged. One started composing a crude wedding song on the spot. It rhymed bride with hide, and that's about all you need to know. Destiny sighed into its ledger, scrawling with a flourish. Incident number 4. Giant proposes marriage in exchange for doomsday weapon. Subtlety dead. Funeral pending. Loki, of course, did not laugh. At least not out loud. He was a professional. But inside, inside he was cackling. The image of Thor's face when he heard this demand would fuel Loki's amusement for centuries. He bowed again, fighting to keep his lips from twitching. "Very well, great Thrym," he said smoothly. "I will deliver your message to Asgard. I'm sure Freya will be thrilled." Thrym nodded, entirely missing the sarcasm dripping like icicles from Loki's words. "Good. Tell her to come quickly. I already reserved the mead." Loki resisted the urge to add, "and the coffin," and instead retreated, feather cloak snapping in the wind as he launched into the skies. Cut back to Asgard. Thor sneezed so hard a roof tile flew off the palace and nearly decapitated a pigeon. "What's taking Loki so long?" he bellowed, stomping around like a thundercloud with legs. Sparks crackled with every step, servants scattering as though preparing for natural disaster. Sif muttered from the corner, polishing her sword with the serenity of someone too used to divine nonsense, probably making things worse. Spoiler, she was not wrong, because when Loki landed dramatically in the Golden Hall and delivered the giant's demand, Freya's reaction was immediate, fiery, and loud enough to be heard in Alfheim. "What?" she shrieked, shaking the very rafters. Brisingamen, her famous necklace, glowed with fury as if even the jewels were offended. The walls of Valhalla trembled. Odin spilled his mead for the first time in centuries. "Marry a giant? Over my dead body." Freya roared. Her beauty alone could scorch armies, but her fury? Entire glaciers cracked in sympathy. Thor gripped his beard, nostrils flaring. He dares ask this? He dares hold Mjolnir for ransom. His sneezes punctuated every sentence, thunder booming in rhythm. And Loki? Loki leaned casually against a pillar, fingers laced, grin spreading like wildfire. He looked, in that moment, exactly like a cat who had dropped a snake into a nursery just to see what would happen. Odin rubbed his temples. "The Norns are mocking me," he muttered. The hall erupted in overlapping shouts. "He insults Asgard. He insults Freya. He insults weddings." And above it all, Freya bellowed, "If that oaf thinks I'll marry him for a hammer, he's madder than Loki on mead." To which Loki responded, "Well, in his defense, I have been very creative on mead." Thor raised Mjolnir-less fist to sky. "Then we go to war. We storm Jotunheim, crush Thrym, and without your hammer?" Loki cut in sweetly. "Yes, excellent plan. Maybe bring a spoon. Very intimidating." Thor growled. Odin sighed. Freya looked one moment away from incinerating someone, and somewhere deep in Jotunheim, Thrym poured himself another tankard, blissfully unaware that his romantic plan was about to plunge the 9 realms into the single most humiliating wedding saga ever written. Thus ended the proposal phase of this tale. And dear listener, you and I both know, when Loki is smirking, Thor is sneezing, and a giant is demanding a goddess's hand in marriage, things are about to get very, very complicated. Chaos. Pure chaos. That was the state of the Asgardia Hall after Loki delivered Thrym's marriage proposal. Thor roared. Freya fumed. Odin rubbed his temples so hard he was in danger of drilling through his own skull. Even Heimdall, normally composed, muttered, "This is beneath us," which, coming from the cosmic doorman of the rainbow, was saying something. The goats, sensing premium drama, fainted theatrically by the door, and then peeked to see if anyone noticed. Freya slammed her jeweled necklace, Brisingamen, onto the table so hard sparks skittered across the gold. "I will not marry that frostbitten oaf," she shouted. "He thinks beauty can be bribed with hammers? Let him try to powder snow with his fists." Thor sneezed. Lightning cracked. Half the candles died of fright. "I'll march into Jotunheim and take Mjolnir back myself," he bellowed, already halfway to the door in his mind, swinging an imaginary hammer and several imaginary outcomes in which he did not get immediately pulverized. "Without Mjolnir?" Loki asked sweetly, tilting his head like a sympathetic viper. "You'd last about as long as a snowflake in Muspelheim." Thor glared, his beard fluffed like an angry storm cloud. "Then what's your brilliant idea, trickster?" "Ah, here we go." The moment Loki had been rehearsing in his head since he left Jotunheim, complete with dramatic pause and optional hair flip. He steepled his fingers, let the silence ripen, and said, We give Thrym what he wants. The hall detonated. Freya hurled a drinking horn at Loki's head. He ducked. It hit a pillar and spontaneously regretted existing. Odin nearly choked on his mead. Sif shouted something so creative that a scribe quietly wrote it down for future emergencies. A Valkyrie in the back muttered, "I'll allow it if I get to stab someone." Loki raised a calming hand. All faux innocence and weaponized dimples. Not really, of course. Obviously Freya won't marry him. But what if Thrym thinks she has agreed? Freya's eyes narrowed into two exquisitely sharpened crescents. Explain. Carefully. Loki's grin lengthened like a shadow at sunset. We dress someone up as Freya. Veil, gown, jewelry, the works. We send her, well, him, to Jotunheim, pretending to be the blushing bride. Once the hammer is brought out for ceremony, boom, grab it back, smash the giants, and be home in time for supper. He waggled his brows. I recommend dumplings. The silence that followed could have frozen the sun. A servant coughed. A goat snored. Somewhere in Vanaheim, a flower wilted in sympathy. Then Thor blinked. Who do you suggest we dress up? Loki's grin went predatory. He could have eaten a constellation with that smile. Why, you, of course. Let us pause to appreciate this moment. The god of thunder, fiercest warrior of Asgard, son of Odin, slayer of giants, had just been told he needed to put on a bridal gown and pretend to be the goddess of love. Somewhere, Destiny fell out of its chair laughing and spilled ink on the future. Thor sputtered, beard bristling in outraged iambic pentameter. What? Me? In a dress? Think of it as armor, Loki purred. A very lacy kind. The hall erupted again. Heimdall coughed into his fist in a manner suspiciously similar to stifled laughter. Sif, eyes bright, said through her teeth, this might actually work. Frigg tapped a finger to her lips. Thinking of omens, threads, and whether the Norns had a sense of humor, they did. Odin closed his eye and whispered a prayer to anyone listening. Thor slammed his fist on the table. Platters leapt. Cups panicked. Never. I am Thor, son of Odin, slayer of giants. I will not prance about in... But Freya interrupted, voice like a thunderclap sharper than Thor's own. Do you want your hammer back or not? Thor froze. The hall froze. Even the goats, mid-peak, froze. One wobbled and re-fainted for emphasis. Finally, Thor groaned like a mountain reconsidering a landslide. Fine, but if anyone laughs... Too late, Loki said, already cackling. Also, everyone will laugh. Destiny scribbled furiously. Incident number 5, Operation Bridezilla officially underway. And so the plan was set. The gods would disguise Thor as Freya, veil and all, and send him to Jotunheim to marry Thrym. What could possibly go wrong? Answer, everything. Absolutely everything. But plans require logistics, and logistics require volunteers. Or, failing that, victims. Odin raised a hand, and the hall gradually reassembled into something like order. First, Odin said, voice low and iron-shod, we need garments. Veil, gown, jewelry, everything Thrym expects to see, but reinforced. If a lace snaps under the brides, he gestured at Thor, vigorous enthusiasm, we lose surprise. The seamstresses paled in unison. Reinforced lace? For Thor? A Valkyrie muttered, we'll need dwarven thread. A messenger sprinted for Nidavellir with a note that simply read, Emergency couture. For Thor. Do not ask. Second, Frigg added, we must address the eyes. She looked pointedly at Thor's lightning blue glare. A veil so dense, even Heimdall would have to squint. Heimdall folded his arms. I do not squint. You will tonight, Loki said cheerfully. Also, we'll need rouge for the cheeks and kohl for the eyes. If anyone argues, explain it's war paint. War paint. Thor repeated weakly, as if trying the words on see if they fit better than blush. Third, Sif said, ticking items off on her fingers with terrifying competence. Teach him to walk like he isn't marching into battle. Shorter strides. Less stomping. No thunder unless absolutely necessary. Fourth, Freya said, reclaiming Brisingamen and holding it up so the hall gasped. This will be worn. On loan. Under a blood oath that returns without sneeze damage. Thor eyed the necklace as if it were a coiled serpent. If it strangles me, I'm haunting everyone. Fifth, Loki chimed in, we need a bridesmaid. No, said everyone seconds too late. Loki already had a garland on his head, and a basket of petals that suspiciously resembled itching powder. Relax, he said, winking. I'll only use the non-explosive petals, unless inspiration strikes. 6. Odin concluded, create a pretext to bring Mjolnir into the hall. What wedding custom can we exploit? Blessing the weapon, Freya said promptly. THRYM will want to display his prize. He's a braggart. The ritual will invite Mjolnir into the open. Then we live or die on timing. Odin said. Thor blesses it with both hands. Loki coughed or glared, and then takes it. A murmur rippled to the hall. Fear, anticipation, the sharp, sweet taste of a plan ridiculous enough to work. Servants scattered. Dwarven runners departed. Valkyries argued over veils versus helmets, ultimately compromising on veiled helmets that looked both majestic and apologetic. A scribe drafted fake vows with flexible phrasing. I promise to devastate your halls with joy. A cook designed a menu that, if thrown, would do real damage. Thor practiced walking without clanking. He failed. Lighter steps, Sif coached. I weigh the same whether my steps are light or heavy, Thor complained, attempting a mince that made a bench groan. From the doorway, the goats watched with wide, unnerving approval. One nudged a tiny flower crown toward the other. They were ready to participate. Night lengthened. The hall transformed. Stacks of silk were quietly reinforced with invisible chainmail. Brisingamen, reluctantly, agreed to cooperate. Freya, supervised with the serene fury of a queen, asked to share a title with chaos itself. Odin sat at the high seat, eyes far away, mind counting possibilities, costs, and omens. At last, the messenger from Nidavellir returned with chest of bridal armor, lay spun with dwarven wire. Strong enough to hold back a small avalanche, and almost comfortable if you ignored the prickling sensation that suggested a forge of opinions about your posture. Thor put it on. The hall hushed. Convincing, Odin said carefully, from the angle of a man looking through four curtains and a prayer. From a distance, Heimdall conceded. In a blizzard, Sif added. At night, Loki finished beaming. Perfect. Freya lifted her hand. One last thing. She stepped close, painted a mark of blessing on Thor's brow, and, against her better judgment, smiled, soft and dangerous. Bring my necklace back. Bring our hammer back. Bring yourself back. Thor, to his credit, did not sneeze. I will. Destiny, eavesdropping as usual, underlined its earlier note 3 times. Outside, somewhere deep in the ice halls, THRYM polished Mjolnir, humming happily, already composing the poem he planned to force on his guests. Inside, Loki clapped once, sharp, delighted. Places everyone, he said, like the world's most insufferable stage manager. The bride has a date, and if the gods felt a prickle along the spine, the sense that prophecy had just leaned forward in its seat and stopped breathing. They said nothing. The goats were hitched to Thor's chariot. The veil was lowered. The petals, possibly non-explosive, were distributed. Then the gates of Asgard opened, and a storm in silk rolled toward Jotunheim. The next morning, the golden hall of Asgard no longer resembled the seat of kings and warriors. Instead, it looked like something between a bridal boutique and a battlefield. Bolts of cloth were strewn like banners after war. Chests of jewelry lay open as though looted from conquered lands, and every surface shimmered with veils, garlands, and pearls. The Valkyries had been reassigned as reluctant dressers. Seamstresses worked as if Ragnarok had a deadline. Even Odin's throne bore scraps of lace draped over the armrests like surrender flags. Why this chaos? Because nobody dared refuse when Odin sighed and Freya glared. That combination carried more force than thunder. Thor stood in the center of it all, red-faced, jaw clenched, a thundercloud crammed into a wedding gown. He growled as servants swarmed him, tossing silks over his shoulders, piling jewelry into his hands. pinning veils atop his head as though he were some ill-tempered mannequin. "This is humiliating," he muttered, tugging angrily at a string of pearls that had wrapped itself around his neck like a smug snake. "It's necessary," Sif replied firmly, braiding flowers into his hair with the determination of a woman who had lived long enough to know when resistance was futile. "Hold still, or I'll stick you with this pen." Thor sneezed explosively, scattering half the flowers across the hall. A servant ducked as petals flew past like shrapnel. From the corner, Loki reclined on a chair, chin in hand, looking every inch the smug fashion critic. "Oh, this is marvelous," he drawled. "Thor, son of Odin, terror of giants, now terror corsets. Truly, history will sing of this day." Thor's growl deepened into a rumble. "Loki, I swear." "Careful, bride," Loki interrupted smoothly. "You'll smudge your makeup." "Yes, makeup." Freya herself had decreed that no operation this absurd would be carried out half-heartedly. She applied rouge to Thor's cheeks with the precision of a general drawing blood from an enemy. Coal circled his eyes, making them smolder like storm clouds. She tied a veil thick enough to hide the truth from Heimdall's far-seeing eyes, though even she muttered, "The Norns are laughing at me right now." "You'd better not ruin my necklace," Freya added darkly, adjusting Brisingamen around Thor's barrel chest. The necklace glittered defiantly, ancient and powerful, but clearly uncertain about its new role as bridal jewelry. It has survived wars, thefts, and Loki's sticky fingers. It will not survive you sneezing on it. Thor, who could lift mountains but not argue with Freya, muttered something about smashing giants with lipstick. Meanwhile, the servants whispered among themselves behind cupped hands. "Is this really going to fool Thrym? He's a giant. Subtlety isn't their strong suit. But Thor's beard. Sure, pretend it's a shadow under the veil." Every whisper was a dagger to Thor's pride. He bared his teeth and gripped Mjolnir's invisible memory under folds of silk, as though willing the hammer to feel his indignation across realms. Even Odin entered, dragging his staff, eyes heavy. He surveyed the scene, the strong disk of his sons trussed up like a bride, and muttered to no one in particular, "The Norns are mocking me. I can feel it in my bones." Then, after a sip of mead, he added, "At least Loki isn't wearing the gown," at which Loki perked up. "Don't tempt me, All-Father." Finally, after hours of adjusting, pinning, sneezing, and arguing, the transformation was complete. Thor, mighty thunder god, Stormbringer hammer wielder, stood before them dressed as the blushing bride of Jotunheim. The gown strained dangerously at the seams, veils quivered from the sheer force of suppressed rage, and his hands looked more suited to throttling giants than holding bouquets. But in dim light, through several layers of fabric, and at a generous distance, say, across a fjord in a blizzard, the effect was almost convincing. Loki clapped his hands together like a delighted midwife. Perfect, a vision of divine beauty. Truly, Thrym will be speechless. Thor growled, his eyes flashing like lightning behind the veil. "I'll behead him before he finishes his vows." "Exactly," Loki said brightly. "That's the spirit." Destiny, perched somewhere above, scribbled gleefully. Incident number 6. Cross-dressing thunder god prepared for a hostile wedding infiltration. Norns currently laughing themselves into stitches. And so, with Thor disguised as Freya and Loki volunteering, without being asked as his bridesmaid, he had insisted on carrying the bouquet. Nobody questioned it. The gods prepared to escort their beloved bride to Jotunheim. The goats were hitched to Thor's chariot, snorting indignantly as garlands of flowers were draped around their horns. The veil was lowered, the bouquet thrust into Thor's reluctant hands, and the bridal party assembled like the strangest war band in history. Somewhere, deep within his icy hall, Thrym polished Mjolnir with clumsy fingers, humming happily. He imagined his glorious wedding feast, his powerful bride, his triumph over Asgard. He had no idea that his dream wedding was about to become the most catastrophic reception in the 9 realms. And Loki, ever the narrator in his own mind, leaned over to Thor as the chariot lifted into the sky and whispered, "Don't worry, dear. If this goes horribly wrong, at least we'll have a story that will outlive us all." He wasn't wrong. The goats hated it. Let's start there. Thor's chariot was legendary, feared across the 9 realms. Pulled by 2 mighty goats, their horns sharp enough to gore trolls, their teeth strong enough to crack femurs, and their hooves loud enough to make mountains rattle in rhythm. They had raced through storms, trampled battlefields, and once even survived an experiment involving Loki's cooking, a story no one speaks without gagging. But this was new. They turned their heads in perfect unison and gave Thor, now veiled, perfumed, and stuffed into a bridal gown. The kind of look only goats could manage, a mixture of betrayal and theatrical resignation. Their eyes said, "This is beneath us." Thor sniffled under the thick veil. Lightning hummed faintly in his nostrils. The veil fluttered dangerously close to combustion. "Stop staring," he growled. The goats rolled their eyes with synchronized disdain and trudged forward anyway, dragging the chariot out of Asgard. Behind him, Loki skipped merrily as though this were a festival, carrying a wicker basket of wedding gifts that included 3 mead jugs filled with unstable runes reed, explosives, a pouch of itching powder for emergencies, and a scroll of Thor's wedding vows written in a loopy, glittering script that practically winked at anyone reading it. At the gates of Asgard, half the court had gathered to watch the spectacle of Thor the bride. Valkyries tried very hard to look stern, but failed spectacularly. Einarjar elbowed each other and whispered about how long Thor's temper would hold. Sif folded her arms and muttered darkly, "If he survives this, I'm never letting him live it down." Heimdall, who had seen everything past, present, and future, covered his mouth in a gesture suspiciously similar to a suppressed smile. Freya herself stood with Brisingamen glittering around her neck, arms crossed so tightly the veins in her hands glowed with power. She muttered curses so potent that flowers wilted in her presence, bees fell from the air, and one unlucky raven dropped dead from the sky. And Odin? Odin just sighed, rubbing his one good eye. "If this works," he said, "then the Norns are comedians." The journey to Jotunheim was long, awkward, and filled with the kind of tension usually found in family dinners where someone mentions politics. Thor tried, gods help him, to sit regally in the chariot, hands folded delicately in his lap. But Thor was not built for delicate. Every time he shifted, the reinforced gown creaked like a dying ship. Every time he adjusted his veil, static sparks leapt between the silken folds. At one point, a flower crown caught fire. Loki, walking beside the chariot, could not resist commentary. "Remember, darling," he said in his best imitation of Freya's velvet tones, "brides are supposed to look shy. Tilt your head. Lower your gaze. Try not to glower like you're about to rip someone's spine out." Thor clenched his teeth so hard that the chariot wheels rattled. "If you speak again, I'll bury you under this gown." "Oh, kinky," Loki purred. "We'll save that for the honeymoon." The goats snorted, clearly enjoying the bickering far more than the mission itself. Halfway through the journey, they passed a village in Midgard. Mortals gasped, bowed, and dropped baskets of apples as the chariot thundered past. One farmer's wife whispered, "The goddess Freya's marrying? But why is she traveling with the trickster? And why does she look so muscular?" Loki waved cheerfully at them, voice ringing with false sweetness. Yes, don't mind the broad shoulders. Love works in mysterious ways." Thor hissed under his veil. "They're mortals, Loki. Don't draw attention." "Relax," Loki replied, adjusting his imaginary corsage. "By tomorrow, they'll convince themselves it was all a dream. Besides, I rather enjoy the idea of a rumor spreading that Freya can crush boulders with her bare hands. It suits her." Destiny, scribbling gleefully in an invisible ledger, wrote, "Incident number 7. Mortals thoroughly confused. Expect new fertility rituals involving dumbbells." The road to Jotunheim grew colder, harsher. Frost bit the air. Peaks rose like jagged teeth against the sky. Thor sneezed again, lightning flaring beneath his veil, and accidentally incinerated a pine tree. Loki applauded. "Wonderful. Fire and ice, all in one ceremony. Thr Wham will weep." Thor muttered, "I'll make him weep." Finally, after much sneezing, grumbling, and Loki serenading the goats with questionable love ballads, they reached the edge of Jotunheim. The land loomed ahead. Glaciers cracked. Cliff stabbed at the moon, and the air itself seemed to carry the groan of old grudges. Everything glowed faintly blue under a moon too large for comfort. At the gates of this frozen wasteland, a group of frost giants awaited them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, each the size of a small mountain, their breath turning into ice clouds. They eyed the bride suspiciously. "She is taller than we expected," one muttered, scratching his head. Loki fluttered forward, curtsying with ridiculous grace, veil fluttering in the icy wind. "She is big-boned." Thor nearly strangled him with the veil, but to everyone's surprise, the giants nodded approvingly. "Good," another said. "Strong hips, many sons." Thor's jaw clenched so hard that an entire snowder collapsed. And so, the disguised thunder god and his trickster companion were escorted into Tichawem's icy hall. It was a cavern carved from glacier and rib bones of beasts long dead, lit by blue fire that danced without warmth. Tables sagged under the weight of oxen roasted whole, barrels of meat larger than houses, and bread so stale it could double as siege weaponry. Giants filled the hall, bellowing and laughing, shaking the ground with every cheer. Behind the throne, mounted high as though it were nothing more than a trophy, rested Mjolnir. The hammer pulsed faintly, glowing smugly, as though enjoying Thor's predicament far too much. Thor sniffled again, clutching his bouquet with enough force to break it in half. He muttered through clenched teeth, "This is the stupidest plan in history." "Correction," Loki whispered back, eyes gleaming with malicious joy. "This is the greatest, stupidest plan in history. You'll thank me at the wedding feast." Thor's only answer was another sneeze that set 3 garlands on fire. The ceremony had not even begun, and already catastrophe simmered. Giants shouted for more mead. Thrym preened like a groom who believed his poetry would be welcome. It wouldn't. Loki skipped among them, showering petals that made several giants itch uncontrollably. The goat sulked in a corner, muttering in goat language about unions, pensions, and hazard pay. And Destiny, perched invisibly in the rafters, dipped its quill in ink, smiling as it wrote. Incident number 7. Bridezilla enters Jotunheim. Catastrophe scheduled for dinner. There are trials of strength, trials of courage, and trials of not flipping a feast table when everyone is being very, very annoying. Tonight, Thor faced a third kind. Thrym's hall was the architectural equivalent of a flex. Ice pillars so thick you could store a glacier in them, antlers for chandeliers, and a centerpiece bore so large it required its own zip code. Music bellowed. Mead sloshed. Giants slapped each other on the back with the force of small avalanches. And at the far end, upon a dais draped in frost-silver cloth, stood the bride's seat, really a throne, already creaking in fear of accommodating Thor's righteous bulk. "Remember," Loki murmured, adjusting the hem of the bridal gown like a fussy ant. "You are Freya. You are delicate, demure, devastatingly pretty, and under no circumstances should you supplice a groom through his own table." "Define under no circumstances," Thor growled from beneath the veil. Before Loki could answer, trumpets made a hollow narwhal horn blared, and Thrym lumbered in, grinning the grin of a man who thinks he has outwitted a pantheon by inventing marriage blackmail. He wore a tunic of stitched bears, boots like boats, and the confidence of someone who had never once looked in a mirror and asked, "Is this too much?" "Behold," he roared, "my bride, the radiant Freya." He spread his arms wide to welcome a hug Thor had no intention of giving. "Tonight we feast, tomorrow we wed, and always I shall treasure your hammer, hand." Loki coughed into his sleeve, a slip of the tongue. How romantic. Thor sat. The chair survived. That was the last normal thing that happened for a while. Servants brought food, mountains of meat, lakes of stew, glaciers of bread. In front of Thor they laid dainty portions, the sort of polite plate that says, "We don't trust you to eat like a person." This was a mistake. Because, and we cannot stress this enough, Thor was hungry. The kind of hungry that writes poetry about second breakfasts. The kind of hungry that considers cows pre-cooked, if you believe in yourself. He waited exactly 1 heartbeat. Then he inhaled. First went the pastries, a tray, then the roasted ox, an ox, then 8 whole salmon in a row like he was playing some obscene flute. He downed 3 barrels of mead for hydration, and nibbled, as a palate cleanser, a shield. The hall fell silent. Giant jaws hung open. A drummer forgot how drumming worked and stared at his hands as if they betrayed him. THRYM himself blinked several times, which in Giant means a brain is rebooting. He managed. My delicate flower seems rather peckish. Loki, to his eternal credit and our temporary salvation, leaned in with the reflexes of a lifelong liar. You see, great THRYM, Freya fasted for 8 nights in her excitement for this union. She said, I will not eat until I see my beloved. Romantic, yes? Now she simply makes up for lost time. A collective ooh rolled through the hall. Giant are romantics when romance involves consumption. THRYM puffed his chest. 8 nights for me? Truly, my bride is perfect. He reached forward, eager to lift the veil. We need to talk about Thor's eyes. Usually they're thundercloud blue and full of opinions about smashing. Tonight, deprived of smash therapy and stuff into chiffon, they burn molten. Lightning wanted out. When THRYM's enormous fingers touched the veil, Thor's gaze shot bolts so bright the nearest jug exploded into steam. THRYM yelped. Her eyes, they glow with passion. Indeed, Loki said smoothly. Freya has not slept either. Love kept her awake. Her eyes are, over-caffeinated with affection. A flute player wept. The toast began. Giants stand poorly on ceremony, but beautifully on mead casks. So they climbed up and shouted blessings such as, May your sons be numerous and your enemies edible, and may your roof never collapse from laughter, only from wrestling. Thor clutched the table to stop his hands from finding necks. Loki squeezed his elbow in warning. Wait. THRYM, buoyed by the success of existing, clapped. Bring gifts for my jewel. Silks, bones carved into charms. And bring the hammer for the wedding blessing. Time skipped. Loki's pupils narrowed to pinpoints. Thor's spine sang like a bowstring pulled to breaking. Even the goats outside, who had wandered around back to chew the cud and criticize, went quiet. The universal sign that destiny has reached the chorus. From behind the throne, for giants shuffled under a weight their pride insisted was moderate. They set the burden upon a cushion of seal hide and withdrew in awe. There it was, Mjolnir, not just a hammer, but the hammer. The room brightened a little, as if the metal remembered sunlight better than stone did. THRYM gestured magnanimously. As tradition dictates, the bride shall place her hands upon the weapon for blessing. After we seal vows. Loki's fingers tightened on Thor's sleeve hard enough to dent divine bicep. Careful, he hissed. We need the timing. Hands only. Lift later. Thor rose, gown whispering like gossip. Each step was a negotiation between rage and ruffles. He reached the cushion, veil down, breath locked. The world narrowed to handle in hand. He touched it, across 9 realms. Storm sat up straighter. Mjolnir sang, not aloud, but through bone and memory. Old battles, promises kept, the smell of rain that belongs to you alone. The handle slid to meet Thor's grip, like a friend who never once believed the rumors. Power backfilled him. The hall flickered. Somewhere a distant cliff decided to collapse for no reason except happiness. THRYM beamed, oblivious. Yes, bless it, my dove. Whisper sweetness to our. Thor squeezed. The hammer leapt. Veil flew. Chair melted. Subtlety died the death it had always been promised. What happened next must be told quickly, because giants never appreciate slow-motion humiliation. Thor, no longer pretending to be anything except Thor, pivoted into a perfect, incandescent swing. The first blow reduced the table to splinters. The second removed the chandelier. Antlers went everywhere. Interior design died heroic. And the third introduced THRYM to the concept of regrets. My bride, THRYM began. The Bifrost Bridge glittered under their feet, carrying them back from Jotunheim like a rainbow that had seen far too much. Once, it had borne heroes returning victorious from battle, Valkyries carrying chosen warriors, and even Odin himself striding with the weight of prophecy. Now it bore Thor, veil shredded, gown ruined, braids frizz from lightning, and dignity somewhere under a pile of frost giant bones. He marched forward with Mjolnir clutched in hand, each stomp rattling the cosmic rainbow. Every stomp was a vow, hammered into shimmering light. Never again. Never. Again. Beside him, Loki skipped like a child who had just discovered firecrackers. Or rather, like a child who had handed the firecrackers to someone else and was now gleefully watching the results. His bridesmaid sash, slightly singed and still dusted with bits of giant wedding cake, fluttered in the breeze. Loki hummed tunelessly, the very image of mischief satisfied. Well, he said brightly, that went splendidly. Thor's shoulders hunched like thunderclouds. Splendid? I had to wear a dress. Yes, Loki purred, and you wore it so well. Truly, I've never seen such commitment to character. The veil, the dainty sips of mead, the way you glared through lace, it was art. Thor stopped mid-step. His eyes narrowed. The air around him buzzed. If you ever speak of this again... Relax, Loki interrupted, grin sharpening. I won't tell everyone. He paused just long enough for Thor's beard to settle. Then, just enough people. The goats pulling Thor's chariot, still smug from having witnessed history, bleated in unison. If you have never heard goats laugh, count yourself lucky. By the time they reached the golden gates of Asgard, the impossible had already happened. Word had spread. Because if there is one thing faster than lightning, it is gossip. And Heimdall, who had, of course, seen everything from his perch at the Bifrost, absolutely did not help. He denied this later, naturally, but the suspicious twinkle in his golden eyes told another story. The crowd gathered. Servants abandoned chores. Warriors left training grounds. Even Odin, seated upon his high throne-like chair in the hall, leaned forward with his single eye gleaming. Valkyries clutched their spears, whispering furiously. Sif, faithful and fierce, tried very hard not to laugh. She failed halfway through and had to disguise it as a cough. Freya stood with arms crossed, her necklace brising and glowing faintly with irritation, clearly offended that her jewelry had been dragged into this absurd performance. And the goats? Oh! The goats pranced proudly, as if they, too, had taken vows in lace. Thor, chest-heaving, raised Mjolnir high. Lightning arced, silencing the crowd for one solemn moment. The hammer is returned, he declared, voice echoing like thunder over mountains. The hall erupted. Cheers thundered back. Cups lifted. Mead spilled like waterfalls. Songs rose. Drums pounded. And for one glorious second Thor just believed, that perhaps he had salvaged his pride. And then, inevitably, Loki cleared his throat. Loudly. Of course. Loki began sweetly, voice carried with the ease of a natural performer. We must not forget how the hammer was returned. The hall hushed. Eyes turned. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened until sparks danced between his fingers. Yes, Loki continued, pacing dramatically. It was not through brute force alone, though Thor certainly provided that in spades. It was not through cunning alone, though obviously my contributions were invaluable. He paused, savoring the silence, drawing it tight as a bowstring. No, dear friends. It was through the courage, nay, the sacrifice of Thor, son of Odin, who, in the name of Asgard, disguised himself as a bride. The silence broke, not in horror, in laughter. It rolled like a tidal wave through the hall. Warriors slammed their fists on tables, choking on mead as they doubled over. Valkyries wheezed, spears clattering as they clutched their stomachs. Servants fell against pillars, wiping tears from their eyes. Even Odin the All-Father, who had seen the dawn and the dusk of ages, coughed suspiciously into his beard, and the cough sounded very, very much like a chuckle. Thor's face turned redder than Muspelheim's lava. Loki! Oh, don't be shy, Loki said, bowing with mock reverence. Truly, you were radiant. The veil suited you. Giant swooned. And let us never forget your delicate table manners. 8 salmon in a single bite. Such grace. Such elegance. A true goddess. Sif nearly fell from her chair laughing. Freya, pinching the bridge of her nose, muttered darkly, At least I would have chewed. Thor slammed Mjolnir into the floor with a crack that shook the hall. Enough! The laughter subsided only slightly. For you see, dear listener, it is very hard to be terrified of someone once you've pictured them daintily adjusting a bridal veil and sneezing sparks through lace. Destiny scribbled gleefully in its ledger. Incident number 9. Thor's reputation forever upgraded to Bride of Thunder. That night, the feast raged louder than any in recent memory. Tables groaned under roasted boar. Casks of meat emptied faster than servants could refill them, and songs rose louder with every verse. And yet, Thor sulked in the corner, drinking mead not from a cup, but from the entire barrel, clutching it like a wounded soldier clutches a shield. Loki, meanwhile, was in his element. He flitted from group to group, retelling the story with new, increasingly embarrassing flourishes. And then, when the giant leaned in for a kiss, "Oh, you should have seen Thor flutter his veil," he declared, throwing lacy gestures into the air. Thor fluttered, a Valkyrie gasped. With all the delicacy of a spring breeze, Loki confirmed. Thor roared from the corner, "Lies!" But the damage was done. Every embellishment spread, growing sharper, funnier, and harder to kill. By dawn, Thunder Bride had already taken root as the newest drinking song in Asgard's taverns. Odin eventually rose, lifting his cup. His voice carried, deep and commanding, but tinged with amusement. Asgard stands safe again. The hammer is home. And though our methods were unconventional, let none say the gods lack creativity. The hall roared in agreement. Cups clashed, voices rose, and the laughter surged again, stronger than thunder itself. Thor groaned into his barrel. Loki grinned like a fox with feathers in its teeth. And the hall of Asgard laughed until the sun rose, spilling light over a realm still buzzing with the tale of its newest legend. Far away, in the frozen wreckage of Jotunheim, the giants groaned under the memory of the most humiliating wedding banquet in history. Teacher Wham, nursing a dented skull and a broken heart, muttered miserably into his mead, "She was the one." His cousins laughed until glaciers cracked. And thus, dear listener, the saga of Thor the Thunder Bride was no longer just a story. It was a joke that refused to die. Because once a tale finds laughter in the 9 realms, it lives forever. Jotunheim was not known for subtlety. When giants were angry, the mountains shook. When giants were humiliated, the mountains exploded. And after the catastrophe of Tichoem's wedding, that wasn't. The mountains rumbled like an orchestra of furious drums that had lost all sense of rhythm, but none of its volume. Picture the scene. A banquet hall reduced to rubble, antler chandeliers snapped like twigs, feast tables smashed into kindling, and a tapestry of giants victorious, hanging pitifully in half. The irony stung more than the bruises. Ticharwam, lord of his hall, conqueror of nothing, sat in the snow with a dent in his forehead courtesy of Mjolnir's loving kiss. He rocked back and forth, muttering the same line again and again, "My bride, my beautiful bride," as though repetition could rewrite reality. His cousins, noble frost giants one and all, gathered around him, solemn as statues for about 7 seconds before the dam broke. "She had shoulders broader than the fjord," one guffawed, nearly dropping his drinking horn. "And ate like 3 herds of oxen," another roared, tears freezing on his cheeks. Truly, Ticharwam, a match made in Muspelheim itself. One particularly sharp cousin leaned in, and the way her eyes glowed with lightning, so romantic, Ticharwam groaned and covered his face. It was Thor, in a dress. Silence, just long enough for the words to echo. Then, inevitably, the silence shattered into roars of laughter so loud that nearby glaciers cracked. Even frost giants have their limits for humiliation, and this prank had not just crossed a line. It had danced on it in a bridal veil. But laughter, as it often does, faded into something darker. Anger seeped into the cracks left behind. For giants could live with losing battles, losing feasts, even losing bets. But losing face? That was unforgivable. A council was called, if council can ascribe 30 giants shouting at once, waving weapons in the air, and occasionally hurling boulders at the wall to punctuate their arguments. One particularly excitable cousin proposed that they should simply rip the Bifrost out of the sky and club Asgard with it. Another countered with kidnapping Freya again, until 3 others shouted never again and clutched their skulls at the memory. They swore vengeance, not just on Thor, but on Asgard itself, on Loki, especially Loki, and, for reasons of collective trauma, on Vales in general. Insults were minted as fast as blacksmith's forge blades. Bridebreaker, gown-bearer, the Thunder Wife. The giants shouted them into the icy wind, testing how far the insults could travel. Somewhere, Destiny scribbled in its ledger with obvious amusement. Incident number 10. Giant invent new swear words. Entire realm traumatized by cross-dressing Thunder God. Meanwhile, back in Asgard, Loki had already assumed the role of gossip columnist, editor-in-chief, and town crier rolled into one. With the enthusiasm of someone born to cause trouble, he repeated the saga of Thor's bridal adventure to anyone who would listen. To the Valkyries, he added extra detail about Thor's blushing veil. To Odin's ravens, he inserted choice verses that carried swiftly on their wings. To mortals, he slipped it into their dreams, so that men awoke laughing and women whispered, "Thunder Bride," while drawing water at dawn. By the time Thor realized what was happening, the tale was galloping across the 9 realms faster than Sleipnir on fresh legs. Thor naturally attempted damage control in the only way he knew how, hitting things. He trained twice as hard in the courtyard. Every blow of Mjolnir crashed down like a storm, echoing, "I am Thor, not a bride. Thor." He hurled boulders until the earth quaked, cleaved air until the sky howled, and roared until the goats fled in terror. But all his efforts meant little when servants passed by and stifled snickers behind their hands. Thor's beard bristled dangerously, a thundercloud trapped on his face. "Mock me again," he warned, "and I will smite." Yes, yes," Loki interrupted. "You'll smite the next person who mentions Vales. But truly, brother, what a story. I could not have written it better myself." Thor glared. "You did write it." "Technicality," Loki replied and winked. Back in Jotunheim, the giant council finally settled on strategy, though settled is perhaps too strong a word. After hours of shouting, only one voice managed to rise above the cacophony. An elder giant, her hair white as snowdrifts and her voice deep as creaking ice, stood tall. The hall grew quiet, save for crackling of a half-broken hearth. "We will not rush," she intoned. "Revenge served hot burns too quickly. We will wait. And when Thor least expects it, when he thinks his hammer and his dignity are safe, we will strike." The hall rumbled with approval. Ale sloshed across the floors. Someone scrawled Operation Thunderbride Revenge onto a wall in jagged runes, spelling errors included. Outside, the mountains groaned with the promise of schemes half-formed. Inside, egos bruised harder than ice plotted their restoration. And somewhere in the shadows between worlds, fate chuckled, because everyone knew this much. If Loki was involved, if Thor was embarrassed, and if giants were plotting, then the saga was far from over. No, this was just the beginning. The Thunder Bride's veil would ripple across the 9 realms again, and the mountains of Jotunheim, humiliated and furious, would make sure of it. Giants are not famous for their subtlety. This is a polite way of saying that their idea of whispering sounds like thunder rolling down a mountain, and their version of secret plotting involves yelling across glacier valleys while throwing rocks to underline points of disagreement, which meant, of course, that Loki overheard everything. He wasn't even trying particularly hard. In fact, it was one of his lazier espionage outings. He had flown to Jotunheim disguised as a raven, classic, though perhaps a little on the nose, perched himself on a broken chandelier that still dangled from what used to be trimmed ceiling, poetic, in Loki's opinion, and watched the chaos unfold below like a theater critic at a particularly disastrous opening night. Down in the ruins of the hall, 30 frost giants were trying and failing. To coordinate revenge for the humiliation Thor had dropped on them along with half a banquet table. "Let's storm Asgard tomorrow," one bellowed, pounding his fist into the snow. "With what?" another shouted back. "Half of us are still itching from that cursed powder they sprinkled on us." He paused to scratch furiously at his arm, producing a sound like bark peeling off a frozen tree. "Then we'll curse their mead barrels," suggested a third giant, his voice echoing off the icy walls. "Too subtle," groaned a fourth. shaking his head. Giants, after all, do not do subtle. Up on the chandelier, Loki tilted his head, feathers gleaming in the dim light. "Oh, this is rich," he muttered to himself. The mighty frost giants, scourge of Midgard, reduced to a committee meeting with worse structure than a goat auction. The bickering only grew louder, until Thrym himself, king of humiliation and owner of a forehead lumped the size of a pumpkin, finally roared for silence. "Enough! We will wait." The hall quieted. Even the scratching giant paused, his fingers mid-itch. Thrym's voice dropped low and dramatic. "Thor will grow arrogant. He always does. And then we strike where it hurts most." The giants leaned in. The fire guttered low. The tension was so thick that even Loki whispered to himself, "Get on with it already." Finally, Thrym raised his arms and declared, "We steal something he cannot live without. Not the hammer. Too obvious. Not his goats. Too noisy. We steal his pride." There was a long pause. The kind of pause where an entire race tries to look thoughtful, but mostly looks confused. "How do you steal pride?" one giant muttered. "With a very large sack?" another suggested, earning a few nods. "Does pride have a smell?" a third asked sincerely. Loki nearly cawed with laughter but caught himself, clutching his beak shut with his wing. "Oh, this is better than theater," he thought. Thor's only weakness, besides disguises, is his pride, and these walking glaciers are about to turn it into a weapon. The giants, still scratching their heads, finally stumbled into a plan. They would spread tales across the 9 realms that Thor's bridal disguise had not been a ruse but the truth, that the thunder god had willingly married Thrym, veil and all, that he was not the slayer of giants but the wife of frost. Destiny scribbled gleefully in its cosmic ledger. Incident number 11, giants invent Asgard's first smear campaign. Loki approves of creativity. Satisfied with this new invention of giant propaganda, Loki decided it was time to leave. He flapped his wings once, twice, and soared out of Ruin Hall, already composing headlines in his mind. Bride of Thunder, Thor's secret life revealed. By the time he landed back in Asgard, he had perfected half a dozen verses, a limerick, and a catchy chorus that would ruin Thor's nights for years to come. Meanwhile, Thor was in Asgard, smashing rocks in the courtyard to prove how masculine and hammer-worthy he was. Every blow of Mjolnir sent sparks flying. Every grunt echoed with stormy determination. And yet, servants giggled behind their hands as they walked past. "I am Thor," he muttered under his breath. Crash, "I am not a bride." Smash, "I am Thor." Kaboom! It became a mantra, a rhythm of denial, as though repetition could erase lace, veils, and very awkward wedding feasts from memory. Unfortunately for him, repetition cannot erase Loki. That evening, Loki strolled into the hall in his human form, sauntering with all the smug grace of someone who has blackmailed material hotter than Muspelheim's forges. "Good news, everyone," Loki announced, clapping his hands. The giants are furious. Thor grunted approvingly, still sweaty from his courtyard smashing. "Bad news," Loki continued, grin widening. "They've started calling you Lady Thunder." The hall erupted in laughter. Valkyries nearly dropped their mead cups. Odin's ravens cawed so hard they fell off their perches. Even Heimdall, whose job was to stand very still and look serious, choked back a laugh that echoed across the rainbow bridge. Thor's face went redder than the volcanoes of Muspelheim. He gripped Mjolnir so tightly the air trembled. "I am Thor," he growled, louder this time, as though sheer volume couldn't do the nickname. Odin, weary and already resigned to the chaos, sighed into his mead. "At least they're not stealing the hammer this time." Loki leaned close, whispering just loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Oh, All-Father, you don't understand. Sometimes humiliation cuts sharper than steel, and Thor, bless his lightning bolts, is about to find out." Outside, storms gathered on the horizon. Giants polished their rumors until they gleamed sharper than swords. Thor tightened his grip on his hammer, jaw clenched, beard bristling. And fate, smug as ever, dipped its quill for the next disaster. knowing full well that pride, once wounded, makes the loudest thunder of all. Thor had had enough. Enough laughter, enough songs, enough whispers of Thunder Bride every time he entered a hall. His dignity, already fragile after the gown incident, was dangling by a single beard hair. The halls of Asgard, once echoing only with the thunder of his victories, now rang with sly chuckles and half-sung refrains. Even the walls seemed to hum with suppressed laughter when he stomped past. So, naturally, Thor decided to fix it. Thor's plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Perform such impressive feats of strength that everyone would forget the embarrassing wedding story. Break enough mountains, split enough seas, crush enough giants, and surely the Thunder Bride ballad would be drowned out by new tales of his unstoppable masculinity. He announced his mission at breakfast, slamming his fist on the table so hard the porridge bowls rattled and a jug of honey splashed into Loki's lap. I will prove once and for all that I am Thor the Mighty, not Thor the Bride. Across the table, Loki choked on his mead, sputtering laughter. Oh, this will be good. Do you want me to draft a ballad for your next disaster now, or after the mountain collapses on your head? Sif rolled her eyes. Thor, nobody doubts your strength. They're just entertained by the other part. Entertained? Thor bellowed. They mock me. Frigg sighed into her cup. Odin muttered something about fate and inevitability. The goats in the corner bleated in harmony. Bride, bride, bride. Thor stomped out, Mjolnir in hand, ready to begin his redemption campaign. Step 1. Impress the mortals. Thor descended into Midgard, where the villagers were already singing the cursed ballad as they tended fields and mended nets. He landed with a boom, startling chickens and sending mortals scrambling. The village bard, perched on a barrel, froze mid-verse as Thor raised his hand. Silence, he thundered. Behold, I will split this mountain in two to prove my strength. The villagers, wide-eyed, abandoned chores and gathered in awe. Thor marched a mountain nearby, its cliffs jagged and proud, and raised Mjolnir high. Lightning crackled across the sky as he brought it down with all his might. The mountain trembled. It cracked from crown to base, a jagged wound splitting the rock. Dust rose, trees toppled, and the earth itself groaned. Truly, it was a feat to be remembered. The villagers clapped politely. Then, with the inevitability of fate itself, someone cleared their throat and sang. The Thunder Bride can split a stone, but still she wore a bridal gown. And just like that, the chorus spread to the crowd until the whole village was singing again. Thor's beard quivered with rage. His mighty accomplishment had only given them more material. Step 2. Smash giants. Determined to silence the mockery, Thor stormed into Jotunheim, land of icy peaks and endless grudges. There, several frost giants were already retelling the wedding story with exaggerated gestures, slapping their knees as they mimed Thor daintily sipping mead through a veil. Face Thor the Mighty, he roared, charging with Mjolnir raised. The giants scrambled, but not fast enough. Thor smashed 3 flat before breakfast. He shattered an ice tower with one blow. He cleaved a glacier in half just for dramatic flair. Snow avalanched down valleys. Wolves howled in terror, and the sky itself seemed to flinch. Panting, Thor planted his feet and bellowed, "Who dares mock Thor now?" One surviving giant, clutching his broken arm, rasped, "Careful, don't trip on your veil." The others wheezed laughter through cracked ribs. Thor nearly exploded on the spot. He smashed another tower in fury, but the giant's chuckles echoed louder than the crash of ice. Step 3. Outshine the gossip. Thor returned to Asgard, chest puffed, ready to declare victory. He imagined cheers, praise, and perhaps even a new saga sung in his honor. Instead, as he entered the Golden Hall, he froze, because Loki, bless his mischievous little heart, was already standing in the center, surrounded by an eager crowd, reciting the entire saga of the Thunder Bride with embellishments. And then, Loki announced dramatically, fluttering an imaginary veil, "Our radiant bride lifted her lace, and lo," the glow in her eyes was not passion, but lightning. Truly, every groom's dream. The crowd howled with laughter. Valkyries leaned on each other for support. Even Odin's lips twitched dangerously. Thor raised Mjolnir, ready to put an end to Loki forever. But Loki, ever quick, gestured the crowd. See? They're laughing, not because they doubt you, Thor, because they adore you. You've given them a tale that will live forever. Thor froze. Adore? His ears rang. Surely they mocked. Surely they jeered. Loki leaned closer, smirk sharpened to a blade. Strength they've seen 1,000 times. But comedy? Oh, Thor gave them art. Thor's cheeks burned hotter than Muspelheim. I am not art. The hall roared again. And just like that, Thor's attempt to bury the story only made it grow stronger. Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 13, Thor's reputation repair campaign backfires. New verses added to the song. Step 4, the song evolves. Thor's feats, instead of silencing the ballad, added fuel to the fire. Every time he did something new, someone twisted it into another verse. When he split the mountain, the mortals sang. The Thunder Bride can split a stone, but still she wore a bridal gown. When he smashed giants in Jotunheim, she flattens foes with hammer's might, but wore her veil all through the fight. When he toppled glaciers into the sea, a bridal wave, a wedding tide, beware the wrath of Thunder Bride. Thor screamed into his beard. The 9 realms sang louder. Step 5, the spread. The song did not stay in Asgard. It spread like fire on a dry plain. In Alfheim, the elves turned it into a delicate ballad with harps and too many harmonies. They sang of Thor's veil catching moonlight, of his bridal blush, of his salmon-devouring grace. Thor muttered. Elves were supposed to be boring. In Nidavellir, the dwarves hammered the rhythm on anvils, turning it into a forged chant. Clang, 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 Thunder Bride smashes wide. Even Mjolnir hummed along, betraying Thor with every beat. In Helheim, ghostly voices whispered the tune through caverns. Warriors newly dead entered the halls of Hel already singing, and Hel herself smirked behind her half-rotted veil. In Midgard, mortals added verses about Thor blessing weddings, with brides lifting hammers instead of bouquets. New rituals sprouted overnight. Somewhere, a farmer's daughter was already naming her goat Bride of Thunder. Step 6, the breaking point. One evening, Thor sat at the feast table, shoulders slumped, as the Valkyries drilled their recruits to the rhythm of the cursed song outside. Even the goats tapped their hooves in time. Odin, sipping mead, said, Thor, you must learn. Stories are stronger than hammers. You cannot smash a song. Thor groaned into his beard. But I can try. Loki leaned in, humming the chorus. Face it, brother. You've gone from warrior to legend, from legend to meme. And memes, unlike mountains, do not crack under hammers. Thor's eyes blazed. Then I shall fight destiny itself. Destiny, smug in its corner, dipped its quill and scribbled. Incident number 14. Thunder Bride Saga unstoppable. Resistance futile. And so Thor sulked, muttering, I am Thor the mighty, not Thor the bride. But deep down, even he could not deny the truth. Some battles cannot be won with steel, storm, or hammer, especially when your greatest enemy is a catchy chorus. Thor thought the humiliation had reached its peak. Mortals sang it. Giants mocked it. Asgard couldn't stop laughing about it. Surely, it could not spread further. He was wrong. Because songs, dear listener, have wings sharper than swords. And once a tale slips past Asgard's golden gates, it belongs not to one god, not to one hall, but to the 9 realms themselves. And this tale, Thor in a wedding gown, veil trembling, eyes blazing, was destined to grow teeth, claws, and a rhythm impossible to ignore. First stop, Alfheim. The elves adored 2 things, music and mirrors. And sometimes, when particularly inspired, they combined the 2, composing songs about their reflections. When Odin's ravens arrived carrying gossip from Jotunheim, they perched on the carved ivory balconies of Alfheim's groves and delivered every detail with the precision of well-trained scandal reporters. Oh, my stars! Gasped one elf, fanning himself with a lute. Thor wore a veil, and pearls added another already humming. We must honor this moment. Fetch the harps. They wasted no time transforming the story into a ballad woven with harps, lutes, and far too many harmonies. Under moonlit trees, with fireflies acting as backup dancers, delicate voices sang. Musical note, O bride of thunder, veiled in might, her eyes like lightning, burning bright. She was no giant, feast instead, 8 salmon gone, 3 barrels dead. Musical note. The elves clapped politely after the first verse, then sang it again louder, then louder still, because politeness only goes so far when mockery is involved. Soon every grove echoed with the tale of Thor, the Thunder Bride. Thor, upon hearing Heimdall's report of this, nearly choked on his mead. The elves, he bellowed, they're supposed to be boring. Loki corrected him helpfully. Graceful brother, not boring, and very good with rhyme schemes. Did you know they invented 7 different words for sparkle? They'll probably rhyme all of them with thunder before this is over. Thor growled so loudly a serving platter cracked. Next stop, Nidavellir. The dwarves were practical folk. They didn't waste time on flowery language or delicate harmonies. If they wanted to sing, they sang loudly and rhythmically, usually while smacking metal with other metal, which, coincidentally, is also how they cooked dinner. So when rumors of Thor's wedding dress reached their forges, the dwarves picked up their hammers and created the forge chant version of Thunder Bride. Clang, clang, clang when the anvils as rough voices roared. Musical note to Thunder Bride. So fierce, so fast. She forged a vow that couldn't last. But lift your mugs, let anvils ring. Her gown was made of lightning sting. Musical note. It was loud. It was brash. And it was so catchy that even the sparks seemed to fly in rhythm. By the time the chorus repeated a 10th time, Thor swore he could feel Mjolnir humming in his grip like it, too, was singing along. He glared at the hammer and muttered, "Traitor." Even Helheim wasn't safe. Now, the dead don't laugh often. It's hard to laugh when your jawbone occasionally falls off. But what they do appreciate is irony. And what could be more ironic than the god of thunder, slayer of monsters, protector of gods, dressed up like a bride? So in the deepest caverns, ghostly voices picked up the tune. Hollow, echoing, unsettling. The song became a chant, drifting like smoke through the mist. Musical note, bride of thunder, veil of flame. All 9 realms shall speak her name. Bride of thunder, chains shall fall. The veil shall shroud the end of all. Musical note. See what happened there? The dead, being the dead, added prophecy to the joke. Because why not? Nothing spices up mockery like a hint of apocalypse. When Thor heard this version, he shuddered so hard that 3 drinking horns fell off the table. This is beyond mockery, he whispered. This is necromancy. Back in Asgard, by the time Thor realized how far the song had spread, it was too late. The Thunder Bride saga had become a pan-realm sensation. Merchants hummed it in markets. Sailors whistled it across stormy seas. Because apparently nothing protects you from drowning like singing about Thor's bridal veil. Valkyries, ever practical, drilled their recruits using its rhythm for marching. Thunder Bride, step, step, Thunder Bride, strike, strike. And worst of all, the tune was catchy. One morning, Thor awoke to find himself humming it. Just a little, barely a whisper. But it happened. He froze mid-breath, horrified. He swore by every storm in Yggdrasil that he would never, ever speak of this incident. But Loki? Oh, Loki noticed. "You were humming it," he said smugly, leaning against a pillar. "I was not," Thor roared, his ears turning red. "You were. On key, even." Thor nearly hurled Mjolnir at his smirking face. The goats had to be restrained, because even they were snickering. Meanwhile, in Jotunheim, the giants were furious. Their smear campaign, designed to humiliate Thor and shatter his reputation, was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of destroying him, it had turned him into an unstoppable cultural export. Mortals adored the Thunder Bride. Gods chuckled, but secretly admired the saga's staying power. And, worst of all, even giants' children were play-acting the wedding in the snow. One child would drape himself in a blanket, hold a stick as a hammer, and roar, "I am the Thunder Bride." The other would faint dramatically, pretending to be THRYM. The parents, exasperated, tried to forbid it. But forbidding a meme only strengthens it. Stop singing it. THRYM roared one evening as a group of young frostlings chanted a chorus outside his hall. His voice shook the mountains. They didn't stop. Back to Asgard, council meeting time. Odin sat at the head of the hall, one hand pressed to his temple. He had survived countless wars, endured prophecies of doom, and lost an eye for wisdom. Yet nothing had tested his patience like his son being turned into a folk song. Finally he spoke. "Thor," he said heavily, "you must learn that stories are stronger than hammers. You cannot smash a song." Thor groaned, slamming his forehead against the table. The table cracked. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Loki leaned back, looking insufferably pleased with himself. "Embrace it. Become the Thunder Bride. Own the name, and they'll never use it against you." "Never," Thor bellowed, beard bristling so fiercely it looked like a storm cloud had taken root on his face. Destiny, perched nearby with its quill, scribbled gleefully. Incident number 14. Saga evolved from embarrassment to unstoppable cultural export. Resistance futile. And so, the tale of Thor the Thunder Bride became bigger than Asgard itself. A joke, a legend, a song, a cultural virus, a warning whispered by the dead, a drinking chant roared by dwarves, a lullaby hummed by elves, and a marching rhythm for warriors. Thor swung Mjolnir harder than ever. Each strike meant to drown the laughter, but every blow only added percussion to the chorus echoing across the 9 realms. The Thunder God had faced giants, serpents, wolves, and the end of the world itself. But now he faced something far more dangerous, a catchy tune. And dear listener, you and I both know catchy tunes are indestructible. Thor had a plan. Yes, again, don't laugh. If songs were the problem, then clearly the solution was to stop the singers. Simple, direct, the kind of logic only Thor could call strategy. So one stormy morning he stomped into Odin's hall, slammed Mjolnir on the table, and declared, "I will silence this cursed Thunder Bride song once and for all." Loki snorted into his mead. "Oh, good. A comedy sequel." Thor ignored him. "I will go to Midgard, find the bard spreading this nonsense, and put an end to their lies." Frigg arched an eyebrow. "And how exactly will you end them?" Thor puffed his chest. "By smashing their instruments." Odin groaned into his hand. Sif muttered, "This will not go well." Destiny scribbled. Incident number 15. Thor invents anti-music tour. Disaster pending. Act 1. The Tavern Debacle. Thor descended into Midgard, following the sound of laughter and poorly tuned lyres. He kicked open the door to a tavern, where a bard was halfway through the famous chorus. Musical note, swing your hammer. Lady fair. Musical note. Crash! Thor smashed the lyre in half. The bard yelped. The crowd gasped. Thor roared, "Enough! I am not a bride." Silence. Then applause. "Wow!" someone shouted. "It's him, the Thunder Bride himself." Another added, "What an entrance!" Smashed the instruments, just like in the song. The crowd burst into cheers, chanting, "Thunder Bride! Thunder Bride!" Thor's beard twitched. "No. Stop. This is not." Too late. The bard picked up a drum. Encore. Thor fled. Act 2. The market mishap. Next, Thor stormed into a bustling market where another bard strummed a lute, surrounded by swooning maidens. Thor seized the lute and snapped it in two. No more songs. The crowd gasped again. Then, predictably, they cheered. "He even destroys instruments like in the verses," a merchant cried. Children surrounded him, giggling. "Sing for us, Thunder Bride." Thor sputtered. "I do not sing." "Then hum," they shouted. Thor sneezed instead. Lightning cracked. The crowd screamed in delight. By the time he stomped away, 3 new verses had already been written. Musical note Thunder Bride smashed a lute in town. Her lightning sneezes shook the ground. She won't admit, but all can see, our bridal god is Destiny. Musical note. Thor nearly fainted from rage. Act 3. The accidental concert. Thor's final attempt brought him to a seaside village, where a festival was underway. Bonfires blazed. Dancers spun. And of course, a bard stood on a stage singing a song. Thor leapt on the stage, raised Mjolnir, and shouted, "This stops now." The crowd roared with joy, assuming this was part of the act. Someone tossed him a wreath of flowers. Someone else shouted, "Dance, Thunder Bride." And somehow, Thor did. Not willingly, not gracefully. But when he stumbled on the stage and tried to regain his balance, the crowd mistook it for dancing. They clapped in rhythm. They cheered louder. And before Thor could escape, the bard shouted, "Give it up for the one and only Thunder Bride." The village erupted. Fireworks lit the sky. Children chanted. Fishermen sang along. Thor had not silenced the song. He had gone on tour. By the time he dragged himself back to Asgard, sweaty, furious, and flower-crowned, Loki was already waiting at the gate. Well, Loki purred. "How was your concert?" Thor groaned into his hands. "I hate everything." Loki grinned. "Cheer up, brother. You're not just a song anymore. You're a phenomenon." Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 15. Thunder Bride World Tour accidentally launched. Merchandising opportunities endless. Thor had reached his breaking point. Not the mild irritation of a god who misplaced his glove. The kind of fracture that makes mountains tremble. The snapping of tolerance after the same old joke is played on you until the echoes wear your face thin. It had started small enough. A tavern chorus. A wink from a farmer who'd heard Loki's rumor firsthand. Then a lyric, then a verse, then a marching chant. Taverns turned his rage into encores. Markets turned his tantrums into chantable refrains. A seaside village crowned with daisies and called a Thunder Bride Tour, and for a week, street vendors sold little dolls with veils that squeaked, "I am Thor the Mighty," when squeezed. Thor loved battle. He loved storms. He loved goats and the smell of fresh-mocked ale after a successful brawl. What he did not love was being immortalized in embroidery as something serenely ridiculous. So he tried everything to make the song stop. He fought harder battles. He took on sea serpents twice the size of the village piers and left an ossuary of humbled waves behind. He staged heroic deeds meant as PR stunts, saving crops from blight, inserted himself with theatrical timing into the middle of a dragon's tax raid, posing on cliff edges where bards might notice the silhouette. He ran to the ends of Yggdrasil and howled into the roots, expecting the world itself to retake his name from laughter. He even tried silence, hiding in empty temples at the top of the world, until even the ravens went elsewhere to gossip. It did not help. The cursed tune followed him like a shadow with better rhythm. One dawn, as the light slipped into Asgard with the careful patience of someone about to deliver bad news, Thor awoke to the sweetest, most murderous sound. A sparrow, sitting on a windowsill, warbling cheerfully. Thunder Bride, veil so bright. For a god of thunder, a sparrow's song can be surprisingly formative. That tiny warble, half melody, half insult, sent something in Thor snapping. He leapt from his bed, armor clanking, beard bristling like a lightning rod. "That's it," he barked. "If I cannot destroy the song, I will change it, rewrite it, make it respectable." Sif, calmly cleaning a spear as if the whole idea of lyrical surgery were reasonable, arched one perfect brow. "Respectable?" "Yes," Thor said, pacing the hall. His boots made dented echoes in the marble. "A hymn to my strength, my victories, my masculinity. No veils, no brides, no festivals. Just Thor the Mighty." Loki, who had been pretending to snooze with an elbow on a tapestry, because affecting casual disdain is performance art, sat up, clapped once, and supplied the perfect aside. "Oh, this will be delicious." He liked the sound of Thor trying to dictate taste. He liked it because he liked watching order collapse into chaos. And this campaign smelled of a delightful collapse. Destiny, for its part, made a little note, smirk scribbled on the margin. Incident number 22. Thor attempts editorial control. Predictable chaos follows. Thor summoned bards. The invitation went out like a royal edict, but with the subtlety of a war horn. Bring lute, drums, and open heart. The bards arrived from corners of Midgard and beyond, bringing verses to test new meters and nephews who thought chorus was a spell. They assembled in the great hall, like a vocal militia ready for culinary critique. Thor's mood was not conducive to subtlety. He slammed Mjolnir upon the table for emphasis. The impact shattered 3 goblets, broke a carving of an ox, and sent a nervous servant into the rafters. Thor's voice boomed. "From this day forward, you will sing my version. A proper song. Try this." He cleared his throat with the sort of vibration that made the servants check their hair. Then he delivered not a poem, but a manifesto. Thor the mighty, strong and tall. Hammer smashes giants all. No veils, no brides, no dresses here. Just thunder, strength, and lots of beer. The bards stared at each other, as if Thor had misquoted a rune. One coughed. Another muttered, "Not very catchy." A lute player scratched out new chords in faint panic. "Make it catchy." Thor roared. If sound waves could command his had, they tried. They stitched the verse into a melody that attempted to strut. They added fanfares. They taught it to the goat herders. They performed it in taverns and markets, and at wakes where standing ovations were rare. The reaction, polite applause, a respectful nod, a bout of audible sobriety. They respected the lyrics. They did not love them. The problem was simple and ancient. Thor's ballad had no surprise, no sugar, no slap. Mortals want to laugh. They want a hook that will stick to their tongue between chores and the mending. Thor's was a polished spear without a point of mischief. But mortals are inventive, and the universe loves a remix. The old song, Loki's original satire, the one that put a veil on a god, was never going to die quiet. It had a pulse. So the bards began to fold Thor's lines into the earlier melody, balancing the swagger of a hero with the ridiculousness of a veil. Out of that collision of intention and mockery came an accidental hybrid, instantly infectious. Thunder Bride, both strong and bold, smashes giants, feasts on gold, with hammer high and veil so wide. All hail our mighty Thunder Bride. It was perfect. It was wrong in precisely the right amounts. Where Thor intended anthemic force, the world returned nuance and made a joke into a cultural artifact. When Thor first encountered the hybrid being belted by a caravan of fisherfolk, he shut down mid-bellow. He had imagined mob fury, perhaps a mass atonement, not this cheerful sing-along. He froze, as if the melody had become a mirror and the mirror had started to wink. "What have I done?" he asked quietly. That admission, small and private, sat wrong on his jaw. He tried to wrest the narrative back. He increased the number and intensity of his heroic acts. He staged rescues in market squares, posed on mountain ledges, struck dramatic lightning displays above bridges. He paraded trophies at banquets in hopes that all would replace giggles. Instead, mortality proved merciless in its inventiveness. Every heroic pose earned a new couplet. The sea serpent he had felled that winter became the dance of the bride. The mountain he cleaved in two was the isle Thor swept aside. Children in Midgard invented play rituals to commemorate the most humiliating moments, reenacting them with astonishing sincerity. Dwarves hammered the hybrid into factory rhythms. Elves added harmony so exquisite the piece nearly ascended beyond ridicule into art, and thereby became even more irresistible. Valkyries, with their fondness for cadence, taught recruits the chorus as a march. Thunder Bride shouted into the wind as shields clashed. Soldiers found morale in the absurd. Loki, of course, delighted. He leaned back in the hall, a grin stretching into mischief and old poems. "Congratulations, brother," he said in a voice bright with mockery. "You didn't just lose. You expanded the franchise." That word, franchise, was like throwing gasoline on an open flame with the firm expectation that it was rain. Merchants in Midgard caught the wind. A crusty baker in a fishing town began producing veil pastries with icing that flurried like sugar snow. Children lined up for treats, greedier than for God's gifts. Street actors reworked scenes into farce, and audiences loved both the farce and the authenticity behind it. Coins may have been minted eventually. No one could say at precisely what hour the mortals decided satire was currency, but once satire entered commerce, it sprouted legs. The song's reach was not merely cultural. It tugged on the threads of fate. Far beyond Asgard, where Gleipnir kept Fenrir bound and prophecy hummed like an old radio, the wolf heard the verses. His laughter was not human mirth, but a cosmic rumble that set stones to shivering. The more the realm sang, the more the chain that bound him groaned. Yes, Fenrir rumbled the wind, crown him with mockery, bind him in song. When I rise, it will be not only his hand I seek, but the story that made him famous. It is at this point that Thor learned a religion's strange lesson. Songs bind more tightly than chains, because songs are woven into people's mouths and then into their bones. After a particularly brutal evening of failed PR and a tavern chorus that turned his heroism into choreography, Thor returned to Asgard exhausted, mud-lined, and temperamentally near to volcanic. He expected scorn, perhaps pity. Instead, Loki greeted him at the gate, humming with the pleasant contentment of a man who had installed a cuckoo in the world's clock. Careful. Loki purred when Thor raised Mjolnir the way one raises a broom to shoo away an annoyance. Smash me, and they'll just add another verse about the Thunder Bride losing her temper. Thor roared, as any sensible god in his position would. Lightning cracked the sky as a reflex. Half a province in Midgard retuned their fiddles immediately. By nightfall, bards in 3 villages had written 2 new choruses celebrating Thor's temper. The mortals adored it. Frustration turned into a slow burn. Thor, who had given his hand in the name of binding a beast, who had stood in ranks and saved lives because gods are the kind of creatures who hold themselves to impossibly high standards, found his identity folding under the weight of a chorus that turned his complex life into an amusing motif. He tried to be surgical. He had the idea, foolish and brilliant in equal measure, to pivot. If you cannot stop a joke, become the joke in a way that robs of its sting. He attempted to produce a new hymn, the kind that would be solemn and stout-hearted. He would rewrite the melody into an anthem of pure, unadorned might. No veils, no farce, only thunder and valor. Instead, that effort gave mortals a new layer to fold into the farce. The hybrid grew wings, doubled down, and the song reintegrated solemnity to sound like some sort of cultural joke that included elements of worship. A curious thing happened. The more Thor raged against the song, the more people found a way to include his anger in the chorus, an accessory, a flourish, a punchline that made heroism singable and marketable. So Thor did the only thing remaining to him that felt decisive. He went to Jotunheim, not as some covert avenger slipping under cover of night, not as a warlord with banners. He rode in his chariot with the thunder of storms behind him and the goat couplets trumpeting, announcing his arrival like a weather system with an opinion about etiquette. When he landed before a giant hall, it was with the force of a prophecy and the humility of a man who had not slept for a week. Snow fell from the rafters like confetti for confused, and the crowd in front of the hall blinked awake. The giants who emerged seemed, at first, too sleepy to be terrified. One scratched his head in a thoughtful manner. Another yawned expansively, stones of ice crumbling from a beard the size of a small glacier. Thrym himself, nursing the familiar lump the size of a small mountain on his brow, hobbled to the doorway, rubbing the spot like a man who had been kissed by a hammer and had been insulted for it later. His voice had that slow gravel of someone not yet convinced it was worth being furious. "Thor," he said, with a degree of enthusiasm one offers a neighbor whose pig had wandered into your garden. Thor stepped forward, planting Mjolnir in the snow and pointing like a thunderbolt with hands. Enough mockery. Enough lies. Face Thor, not the Thunder Bride. The crowd's faces registered confusion in varying degrees. One giant mumbled, "Thunder what?" Thrym blinked. "Not this again," he growled. For a moment you could see the math in his head. News cycles, one-upmanship, the economy of insults. He rubbed his temple, as if the very idea of theater at this scale was mildly inconvenient. Thor roared again, a challenge that split the air. "You spread this filth across the realms. You turned me into a ballad of fools. Admit it." Thrym squared his shoulders, the gestures of a chieftain accustomed to large problems and larger appetites. "Thor," he said slowly, "we stopped singing that weeks ago." The words landed like cold stones. Thor blinked. "What?" "After the first 3 days, it wore thin," Thrym explained, as if reciting the weather. "Children wouldn't shut up. Hunters hummed it in the snow. Our shamans tried to turn it into a curse and spat out cheese instead. We banned the song. We burned the written copies. We told the bards to find a new pastime. Across the hall, a particularly apologetic cousin nodded. "We were tired of it," he admitted sheepishly. "Very tired." Thor felt, for a moment, the awkwardness of someone who had traveled across thunder and ice to kick a hornet's nest that had already been smashed. "So you aren't singing it anymore?" "Absolutely not," THRYM said. He sounded like a large animal, relieved to have shrugged off a tick. "We hate it. The mortals, though. That's on you." He shrugged with indifferent finality. Loki, who had been waiting patiently behind a carved pillar and had, it must be said, shouted surprise on arrival because subtlety is not his forte, could not help himself. He cackled. "Oh, Thor, the joke outgrew the giants. It lives because the mortals love it. You're not fighting Jotunheim. You're fighting popularity." The sting of that sentence cut closer than any hammer. Thor felt his beard compress with stormy silence. "Then I'll smash the mortals too," he declared absurdly, which is an escalatory step only a god in full temper might consider. Teacher Wyam, rubbing his forehead, gave a practical look. "Good luck. They outnumber you," he said with the kind of patient pity one reserves for people threatening markets. The atmosphere in the ruined hall softened, sourly human. It produced an odd alliance. Giants and God met at a precarious table, trading complaints like old soldiers trading maps. For the first time in known history, both shared a mutual hatred. Not for each other, not for a battle, but for a chorus that would not die. They drank. The frost ale flowed. One giant reminisced about having been forced to dance choreography to the lyrics at his daughter's mock wedding. Another admitted to humming the chorus while sharpening his axe, leading to a heavy, awkward silence when anyone in the hall imagined a man humming a song about veils while handling blade and honor. Thor went remembering the seaside villagers who had crowned him with daisies under the mistaken belief they honored his bravery. One farmer had insisted he bless a harvest with a stomping that turned into an involuntary jig. Children had demanded a step-by-step demonstration. There was a man in Midgard, not a bard but a merry smith, who'd put Thor's face on a stew pot and declared it a fashion statement. That man received a surprisingly generous donation from Thor's household later. Thor preferred to imagine that he'd cursed the pot, but deep down, he hoped it made someone laugh for a long time. At the long table in the Frost Hall, stories were traded like weapons. The giants told tales of mortals who could make the most terrible things beautiful. Thor begrudgingly told stories of valor in storms and how sometimes, in the middle of rage, he found beauty too, the way lightning embroidered itself across night, the way a good meal restored legs and dull edges. For a few hours, laughter in the hall was reclaimed. It was not mocking laughter. It was the kind that knits together, the kind THRYM and Thor both recognized as human and necessary. By the night's end, the alliance had become a truce of convenience. Both sides grumbled and accepted the world's absurdities because they had to. They agreed, in the clumsy way of tired conspirators, to seek more direct enemies. Giants would stop the smear campaign and focus on more substantial grievances. Thor would direct his ire back to threats that threatened lives and lanes instead of choruses. When Thor returned to Asgard, he expected some sign of forgiveness or at least strategic silence. Instead, Loki met him at the gate, twitching with that boyish glee that meant mischief had multiplied. "Careful," Loki purred as Thor raised Mjolnir threateningly. "Smash me, and they'll just add another verse about the Thunder Bride losing her temper." Thor bellowed, lightning cracking in reflex. The heavens obliged with dramatic thunderclap, which inspired 3 new verses across Midgard within the night. Bards are alert to metaphor and lightning. They loved both. Thor's relationship with the song had evolved. It had shifted from humiliation to folklore to a strange communal thing he both despised and recognized was welded to the idea of people needing a story. He kept his hammer close and his patience closer, now aware that the string between a god's reputation and a peasant's chorus was thinner than he had thought. And that once tugged. It made the whole tapestry vibrate. Destiny, signed with the smugness of pen in hand, wrote in the margin again. Incident number 16. Thor and Jotunheim agree for the first time. They both hate the song. The world continues to sing anyway. At the edge of the world, the chain that bound Fenrir hissed in a way that sounded suspiciously like amusement. Somewhere in the portraits of the Norns, a smile was sketched into fate's corners. The song would go on. The verses would proliferate. And for as long as mortals loved it, whatever godly pride was left standing would be caught in the chorus, half defended and half embroidered, until the day when larger things, fire, ice, prophecy, demanded a different kind of song. Thor had reached his breaking point. After taverns turned his rage into encores, after markets turned his tantrums into verses, after an entire seaside village crowned with daisies, and called it a Thunder Bride tour, he decided there was only one solution left: revenge. And who better to blame than the giants who had started this whole mess? So, one stormy dawn, he summoned his goats, gripped Mjolnir, and announced, "I will go to Jotunheim. I will smash their halls. I will silence their mockery once and for all." Loki, leaning against a pillar with that eternal smirk, replied, "Excellent idea. Nothing says, 'I am not embarrassed,' like smashing your critics." Very subtle. Thor ignored him, as he often did when Loki was right. Arrival in Jotunheim. The land of frost groaned under Thor's approach. His chariot thundered through the clouds, lightning flashing in warning. Villagers ducked into caves, and avalanches rolled down cliffs. Thor landed in front of a giant hall, bellowing, "Come out, cowards! Sing your songs in my face." The doors creaked open. A crowd of frost giants emerged, blinking sleepily. One scratched his head. Another yawned. Finally, Thrym himself stumbled forward, still nursing the scar from Mjolnir's last introduction to his forehead. Thor pointed his hammer. "Enough mockery. Enough lies. Face Thor, not the Thunder Bride." The giants looked at one another, confused. "Thunder what?" one muttered. Thrym groaned. "Not this again." "Yes, this." Thor roared. "You spread your filth across the realms. You turned me into a ballad. Admit it." Thrym rubbed his temples. "Thor, we stopped singing that weeks ago." "What?" "Do you know how quickly giants tire of jokes? After the first 3 days, everyone was sick of it. Children wouldn't shut up. Hunters sang it in the snow. Even our shamans tried to turn it into a curse. Didn't work. We banned the song." Another giant added, "You should have seen our chieftain try and explain why warriors kept humming about veils while sharpening axes. Very awkward." Thor froze mid-rage. "So you're not singing anymore?" "Absolutely not," Thrym groaned. "We hate it. The mortals, though." "That's on you." Loki, who had followed discreetly, meaning he had shouted surprise when Thor landed, cackled. "Oh, Thor, the joke outgrew the giants. It lives because mortals love it. You're not fighting Jotunheim. You're fighting popularity." Thor's beard bristled. "Then I'll smash the mortals too." "Good luck," Thrym muttered. "They outnumber you." An awkward truce. For the first time in history, Thor and the giants found common ground. Mutual hatred of the song. They sat in the ruined hall, drinking frost ale, grumbling about verses. "I had to walk my daughter down the ice aisle," one giant complained. Guess what they played? Thunder Bride. She thought it was hilarious. Thor winced. "Mortals asked me to dance to it." The hall groaned in sympathy. By the end of the night, Thor was still furious, but now furious at mortals, not giants. Which, let's be honest, was a dangerous shift. Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 16. Thor and Jotunheim agree on something for the first time. They both hate the song. When Thor returned to Asgard, Loki was already humming. Thor raised Mjolnir threateningly. "Careful," Loki purred. "Smash me, and they'll just add another verse about the Thunder Bride losing her temper." Thor roared. Lightning cracked, and in Midgard, bards wrote 2 new choruses that very night. Odin had tolerated much in his long reign. Wars, betrayals, Ragnarok prophecies, you name it. But even he, the All-Father, had his limits. And those limits were tested the day he walked into the Great Hall and found half of Asgard's warriors marching in rhythm to the cursed Thunder Bride song. Not just humming, marching, with spears tapping the ground on every beat. Musical note, Thunder Bride, veil so bright, strikes with hammer, full of might. Musical note, Odin pinched the bridge of his nose. Frigg muttered, This has gone too far. Loki, of course, was conducting them like an overexcited choir master. Thor sat sulking in the corner, arms crossed, face buried in his beard. Every beat of the chant made his shoulders twitch. Finally, Odin raised Gungnir and slammed it against the floor. Enough! Silence fell. Well, almost. One warrior hummed the last note before shutting up. Odin's voice was calm, measured, heavy. This song will not die. Mortals sing it. Elves sing it. Even the dead sing it. And now Asgard sings it. If it cannot be silenced, then it must be used. Thor's head shot up. What? Yes, Odin said. We will turn it into a weapon. A hymn of Asgard. If the 9 realms will not stop singing of the Thunder Bride, then we will teach them to sing it with fear, not laughter. The hall gasped. Thor groaned. You can't be serious. Loki grinned. Oh, he's very serious. And brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. The first Thunder Bride parade. Odin wasted no time. Trumpets blared through Asgard. Banners unfurled, embroidered with lightning and, yes, bridal veils. Soldiers assembled in ranks, shields gleaming, voices raised in unison. When Thor marched at the front, reluctantly flower-crowned again, the chorus shook the golden streets. Musical note bride of thunder, veil of flame, enemies tremble at her name. With Mjolnir's strike, the skies divide. None can stand the Thunder Bride. Musical note. And you know what? It worked. Mortals watching from afar fell to their knees. Awed. Giants, hearing the thunderous chorus echo through the realms, hesitated before taunting. Even the elves stopped laughing long enough to scribble possible diplomatic anthem in their scrolls. Thor, however, wanted to die. The propaganda machine. Odin doubled down. Coins were minted with Thor's hammer wrapped in a veil. Valkyries taught recruits to chant as a battle march. Merchants sold mugs, tunics, even candied almonds branded Thunder Bride Bites. The song was no longer a joke. It was everywhere. It was unstoppable. It was state propaganda. Thor begged Odin to reconsider. Father, please. My dignity. Your dignity? Odin thundered. Your dignity is already gone. But Asgard's image? Stronger than ever. Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 17. The Thunder Bride becomes official war anthem of Asgard. Morale skyrockets. Thor's patience plummets. Loki's personal triumph. Of course, no one enjoyed this more than Loki. He took credit for the anthem's lyrics. He hadn't written them, but details are boring. He whispered to bards that they should add even more verses, each one more ridiculous than the last. And he never, ever missed a chance to remind Thor. At breakfast, past the mead, O glorious bride. At dinner, would the Thunder Bride like more salmon? Before battle, don't forget your veil, dearest. Thor's beard practically sparked with fury. The problem with prophecy. But while Odin congratulated himself on outmaneuvering embarrassment, something darker stirred. Far beyond Asgard, on the plain where Gleipnir held the wolf Fenrir. The chain quivered. The wolf's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Yes, Thor, they name you louder than ever. They crown you with mockery and glory alike. And when I rise, I will devour not just your hand, but your story. Bride, groom, warrior, it will not matter. Only jaws remain. The chain groaned. Stars flickered. And somewhere in Asgard, the chorus swelled louder, feeding the very prophecy Odin thought he was controlling. Thor, watching from the wall that night, muttered into his beard, I hate everything. The goats bleated sympathetically. Thor had endured much in his life. Frost giants, serpent battles, Loki's jokes, even goats that ate his tunics. But nothing was as unbearable as waking up to see his own face painted on banners across Midgard, crowned with flowers, underneath the words, Thunder Bride Festival, all are welcome. Yes, dear listener, Odin's propaganda machine had gone into her realm. Thor's attempted boycott. The All-Father had declared the Thunder Bride anthem official. The Valkyries sang it. The dwarves stamped it on coins. The elves choreographed a dance to it. Too much glitter, but surprisingly accurate. But mortals? Mortals did what mortals always do. They turned it into a holiday. When Thor first heard of it, he nearly choked on his mead. A festival? In my honor? Without my consent. Sif patted his hand. At least they honor you. They mock me. Thor roared. Loki grinned. They celebrate you. Mockery and celebration are cousins, brother, sometimes twins. Thor declared, I will not attend. Let them have their silly games without me. Destiny scribbled. Incident number 18, Thor attempts boycott. Spoiler, fails spectacularly. Arrival in Midgard. Thor tried to ignore it. Truly, he did. But curiosity is stronger than thunder. And when mortals started lighting bonfires in his name, he found himself descending, muttering, just to make sure they're not dishonoring me. The scene? Chaos wrapped in joy. Lanterns shaped like hammers. Cakes decorated with veils of icing. Children running about in tiny fake beards. And everywhere the cursed anthem. Musical note Thunder Bride, our mighty friend. Her feasts and strikes will never end. Musical note. Thor's jaw dropped. This is worse than Helheim. Before he could retreat, a mortal spotted him. It's him, the Thunder Bride. And just like that, Thor swarmed. Mortals offered him garlands. Bakers shoved dumplings into his hands. A group of musicians begged him to bless their instruments. Thor sputtered, No, no, I am not, this is not. Someone tossed a veil onto his head. The crowd cheered. The Thunder Bride games. Oh, yes, there were games. Bride toss. Who could throw a hammer-shaped bouquet the farthest? Veil sprint. Children racing while holding Faber behind them like lightning tails. And the worst, Mjolnir karaoke, where mortals attempted to outshout thunder. Thor stood frozen as an enthusiastic farmer screamed the chorus, so loudly the goats fainted. Loki, of course, was already there. Brother! He shouted from the judge's stand, wearing a crown of tulips. You made it! You're just in time to preside over the feast. Thor's beard bristled. Feast! The crowd roared. Speech! Speech! Thor's speech, unintentional concert. Thor raised Mjolnir. Lightning flashed. The mortals cheered louder. I am not your bride. Thor shouted. Encore, they screamed. I am Thor the Mighty. Thunder Bride. Thunder Bride. In his rage, Thor smashed the table. The crowd went wild. She's doing the dance. She's doing the dance. By the time the bonfires died, Thor had, against his will, headlined the very festival he swore to boycott. Mortals sang new verses. Children wore tiny hammer pendants, and even the goats wore veils. Back in Asgard, Thor stormed into Odin's hall, still flower-crowned, still fuming. This madness must stop. Odin, sipping calmly, said, On the contrary, morale has never been higher. Even the Vanir asked if they can license the festival. Thor groaned into his beard. Loki hummed the chorus. The goats bleated it back. Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 18, Thunder Bride Festival established. Annual recurrence inevitable. And thus, Thor learned a grim truth. Sometimes rebellion only makes a festival bigger. Thor had made a vow. A very loud, very dramatic vow. There will be no second Thunder Bride Festival. I forbid it. I will smash every banner, burn every veil, and flatten every bakery that dares frost a cake with my beard. The goats bleated in mild applause. Loki clapped slowly. Touching speech. Completely futile, but touching. Thor ignored him. This time, I will not be tricked into participating. This time, I will crush their foolishness before it begins. Destiny scribbled in its ledger. Incident number 19, Thor declares war on festivals. Outcome, predictable disaster. The second festival approaches. Midgard's villages have been buzzing for weeks. Posters, yes posters, hand-painted with questionable accuracy, showed Thor in bridal garb, Mjolnir glowing, goats in flower crowns. Merchants prepared stalls filled with Thunder Bride treats, lightning candied apples, hammer-shaped cookies, dumplings wrapped in silk. Thor descended in a storm cloud, cloak billowing, face grim. I will destroy it all, he muttered. But when he landed in the market square, he found stalls already lined with Thunder Bride dolls. Tiny, bearded flower-crowned dolls. Thor blinked. What is this? A child ran up, hugging one. Look, my Thunder Bride plushie. It squeaks when you squeeze it. Thor squeezed it. The doll squeaked. I am Thor the Mighty. He almost fainted. Operation Sabotage. Thor began his rampage. He smashed stalls, snapped banners, stomped through bakeries. The mortals, naturally, assumed it was part of the act. Behold, the Thunder Bride blesses our wares by destroying them, one merchant cried, scooping up shattered pottery. These shards will sell for double. Thor froze mid-swing. Double? Another merchant shoved a basket into his arms. Smash these two, great one. The more you break, the more authentic. By nightfall, Thor had destroyed half the festival. Mortals hailed him as guest of honor. They sold authentically smashed mugs at triple the price. The birth of merchandising. Thor thought he was crushing their spirit. In truth, he was creating collectibles. Every item he smashed was preserved, labeled, and sold. Thunder Bride signed pancake pan with genuine dent. Flower crown, singed by lightning. Goat, hoof print souvenir. Even worse, the mortals minted tiny hammer coins with his veiled face stamped on one side and the words Bride approved on the other. Thor groaned. I am feeding the fire. Loki appeared with a sack full of coins. Correction. You're making the fire profitable. You've invented merchandising. Brother, you should be proud. Thor bellowed into the sky. Lightning answered, forming the cursed words in clouds. Thunder Bride Festival, now with official merch. Return to Asgard. Thor stomped into the Golden Hall, arms full of plushies, mugs, and coins. He threw them at Odin's feet. Do you see? This is madness. They're selling me. Odin, calm as ever, picked up a plushie. He squeezed it. I am Thor the Mighty, it squeaked. Odin smirked. Accurate enough. Frigg patted Thor's shoulder. At least they love you. Thor buried his face in his beard. Loki juggled mugs and hummed the anthem. The goats chewed on flower crowns. Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 19. Thor invents merchandise empire. Mortals rejoice. Asgard profits. Thor suffers. And so, Thor's sabotage had the opposite effect. The second Thunder Bride Festival was not smaller. It was bigger, brighter, louder, more profitable. And Thor was now not just a meme, not just an anthem, but a brand. Thor had had enough. Enough festivals. Enough plushies. Enough mugs with his veiled face stamped across them. The goats had started drinking exclusively from bride-approved cups, which was an insult he did not need at breakfast. He had tolerated the Valkyries humming the tune while sharpening their spears. He had ignored the dwarves hammering it into their forward songs. He had even tried to pretend that the mortals naming their daughters Bride of Thunder was flattering. But when he saw a tapestry hung in Odin's hall, depicting him in full bridal gown, veil fluttering while he smashed giants with Mjolnir, Thor snapped. This ends now, Thor declared, standing in the middle of Odin's hall, fists clenched, thunder booming outside for dramatic effect. I will perform a deed so mighty, so terrifying, so unquestionably heroic, that no bard, no mortal, no god will dare remember me as anything but Thor the Mighty. Odin sipped his mead, unimpressed. Try not to destroy too much infrastructure. Frigg sighed, or your dignity. Loki clapped gleefully. Oh, yes. Go, brother. Save a kitten from a tree. Wrestle a goose. Something grand. Thor ignored him. Destiny scribbled. Incident number 20. Thor launches reputation redemption quest. Spoiler. Fails spectacularly. The heroic opportunity. Fate, clearly enjoying the show, wasted no time in providing the perfect test. That very day, Midgard erupted in panic. Word spread to Asgard on the wings of Odin's ravens. A serpent had risen from the sea, longer than 10 ships, scales gleaming like black ice, eyes glowing like molten gold. It slithered into the fjords, smashing fishing boats, capsizing traders' vessels, and coiling around rocks as though the coastline itself were prey. Perfect. Thor's chance. He descended in a storm, Mjolnir blazing, voice booming like 1,000 war drums. "Fear not, mortals, Thor has come." The mortals, however, were mortals. They had long memories and longer sense of humor. And so the first fisherman, clutching a broken oar, pointed and shouted, "It's the Thunder Bride." Thor's beard twitched dangerously, not helping. The battle. The sea serpent reared, towering above ships and cliffs alike. Water poured off its coils, hissing as it touched the rocks. Its tongue flickered like lightning, and its fangs dripped venom that smoked holes into the earth. Thor planted his feet. He swung Mjolnir once, twice, thrice, calling down storms that split the heavens. Lightning lanced across the serpent's scales, dazzling the mortals below. Thunder rolled, so loud it shook snow from distant mountains. The serpent lunged. Thor met it head-on. Hammer struck Fong. Sparks flew. Waves crashed so high they drowned the cliffs. Mortals screamed and clutched each other, half in terror, half in awe. Thor leapt upon its back, hammering scale after scale until they cracked. The serpent twisted, shrieking, trying to hurl him into the sea. Thor dug his heels in, bellowing, "You face Thor the Mighty!" He hurled Mjolnir into its jaw, shattering teeth the size of spears. The serpent recoiled, screeching, before slithering back into the depths with a final hiss that boiled the water. The sea stilled. The storm faded. The serpent was gone. Victorious, soaked, roaring with triumph, Thor stood upon the cliffside. He raised Mjolnir high, lightning crowning him in silver fire. "Behold," he roared, "Thor the Mighty has triumphed." The problem with audiences. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Mortals gaped at him, their mouths open. At last, Thor thought, they will sing the right song. Then a farmer pointed and said, "Did you see how the Thunder Bride lifted her veil of lightning to blind the serpent?" Another, a fisherman with seaweed in his hair, nodded eagerly. "Aye." And when she spun, it looked like she was dancing at her wedding feast. "And the serpent," a child chimed in, "it bowed like a groom at the altar before fleeing." The mortals, already buzzing with inspiration, turned to the village bard. He scribbled furiously on a scrap of parchment. Thor's triumph had just been rewritten. Thor froze. No, too late. By the time he trudged back to Asgard, soaked and scowling, the new verse was already spreading faster than Loki on gossip duty. Musical note bride of thunder faced a wave. Serpent struck, but she was brave. With veil of lightning, hammer wide, she danced the storm, our Thunder Bride. Musical note. Back in Asgard, Thor stomped into the golden hall, dripping seawater across the polished floor, eyes blazing. "I destroyed a serpent, and they made it into another bridal verse." Loki, lounging with a goblet, leaned back and smirked. "You're welcome. I may have suggested the dance part." Thor roared, lightning sparking in his beard. "Loki!" Odin, without looking up, muttered, "At least the serpent is gone." Frigg, ever the voice of calm, patted Thor's arm. "And the mortals adore you. Is that not enough?" "No," Thor thundered. "I want their respect, not their embroidered handkerchiefs with veils on them." Indeed, several such handkerchiefs were already being sold in Midgard's markets, bearing crude depictions of a veil Thor spinning majestically in the storm. Merchants made fortunes overnight. Thor glared at the ceiling, muttering the words he always muttered now. "I hate everything." Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 20, heroism achieved. Reputation destroyed further. Ballad extended by 3 verses. The aftermath. The bards, naturally, exaggerated the tale. Within days, the serpent had grown tenfold in the story, until Thor's bridal veil was said to have ensnared the beast like a net of lightning. Midgardian children reenacted the battle at village fairs, one dressed in a tablecloth veil, the other wiggling on the ground as the serpent. Judges awarded prizes for the most graceful spin. The dwarves, not to be outdone, incorporated the new verse into their forged chants, banging anvils in rhythm. Musical note Thunder Bride, with storm and might, blinded serpents in her fight. Musical note. Even in Helheim, the dead hummed a new refrain, their hollow voices echoing through caverns like a ghostly choir. Thor tried, he truly tried, to ignore it. But the goats, those traitorous beasts, bleated the chorus every time he passed. And Loki, of course, had taken a humming it under his breath whenever Thor was within hammer-throwing range. The final straw came when Thor woke one morning to find that he, in his sleep, had been humming the song himself. He sat up, horrified. No, 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 no. Loki popped his head in from the doorway, grinning. On key, even, Thor nearly threw Mjolnir at him. And so Thor learned another grim truth. Even the grandest victories cannot outshine a catchy chorus, especially when Loki keeps adding dance moves to the story. Because once a saga is born, it grows wings sharper than swords. And no matter how many giants he crushed, no matter how many seas he calmed, Thor would forever be remembered not just as a god of thunder, but as the bride who danced upon the storm. Thor had reached a breaking point. Again. "Father," he said one morning at the feast table, slamming down his mug so hard the porridge splashed into Loki's face, a small victory but short-lived. "I can no longer endure this. Everywhere I go, mortals chant, elves sing, even dwarves clang anvils in rhythm. I cannot walk into a hall without hearing that cursed song." Odin sighed. "It is bigger than you now, Thor. Songs travel faster than lightning." Thor growled. "Then I will go where songs cannot reach." "Good luck with that," Loki muttered, wiping porridge from his nose. Thor's great escape. Without another word, Thor leapt into his goat-drawn chariot and soared into the skies. He flew past Midgard, past Alfheim, past Nidavellir, muttering, "No songs, no festivals, just peace." Finally, he found himself drifting toward Muspelheim, land of fire and endless flame. "Yes," he said grimly. "Surely here, no bard dare sing. Who could write a ballad in the middle of lava?" Spoiler, someone had. The Muspelheim surprise. Thor landed among the fire giants, who greeted him not with spears, not with flame, but with lutes. Fiery lutes, glowing with embers. One giant plucked a cord. Another pounded a drum made of molten stone. And then, with terrifying synchronization, they began to chant. Musical note, bride of thunder, veil of flame, even fire sings her name. With molten steps, she strides with pride. The lava loves the thunder bride. Musical note, Thor dropped Mjolnir. No. Yes, the giants intoned, strumming harder. Thor's meltdown. He tried to silence them. Truly, he did. He shouted. He waved Mjolnir. He even summoned lightning to drown out the rhythm. But every strike only added percussion. Clash, crack, boom. The giants swayed, chanting louder, their voices echoing across the fiery plains. Mortals hadn't spread the song here. The prophecy itself had. Songs have a way of sneaking through cracks in reality. And this one was unstoppable. Thor roared to the sky. "I guess there ain't no escape?" A passing fire demon shrugged. Catchy tune. Retreat. Defeated. Thor climbed back into his chariot and fled Muspelheim. Perhaps Helheim, he thought. Surely the dead don't sing. Wrong. The dead sang slower, eerier, but they sang. Musical note, thunder bride, through veil of night. Her hammer strikes, her eyes alight. Musical note. Thor groaned. Even death was not free of music. The final blow. At last, desperate, Thor retreated to the edge of Yggdrasil itself, where roots tangled in silence and no voices dared wander. He collapsed against the bark, exhausted. For a blissful moment, silence. Then a bird chirped the opening notes of the cursed tune. Enelo. Thor bellowed. Destiny scribbled in his ledger. Incident number 21. Thor attempts escape. Discovers song omnipresent. Sanity questionable. Back in Asgard, when Thor returned, cloak singed, eyes hollow, Loki was waiting with a grin. Well, Loki asked. Thor groaned. It's everywhere. Even birds sing it. Loki patted his shoulder. Cheer up. You're immortal. So is the song. Thor buried his face in his beard. The goats bleated the chorus. And somewhere far away, Gleipnir groaned as Fenrir stirred, laughing at the noise. Thor had tried everything. And by everything, we mean everything. He battled frost giants with twice the fury. He lifted mountains just to prove a point no one had asked for. He stormed across Midgard, rescuing farmers from wolves, villagers from trolls, and once, awkwardly, his own goats from getting stuck in a fence. He even climbed to the edge of Yggdrasil itself, standing on branches older than time, roaring his name so loudly that birds fainted. But none of it mattered. The cursed tune followed him everywhere. In the meadows, shepherds hummed it while tending their flocks. In the forges, dwarves whistled it over anvils. Children turned skipping ropes into impromptu stages to chant it. Even the wind seemed to carry the refrain. Thor swore that once, while fighting a sea serpent, he heard the waves themselves crash in rhythm. Thunder Bride, veil so wide. And then one morning, just as dawn painted Asgard in gold, Thor was jolted awake not by thunder, but by a sparrow outside his window. A sparrow, chirping sweetly, happily, innocently. Thunder Bride, veil so bright. Thor snapped. That's it. His voice shook the rafters. If I cannot destroy the song, I will change it, rewrite it, make it respectable. Sif, sitting calmly with a comb in her golden hair, arched a brow. Respectable? Yes, Thor declared, pacing across the hall with dramatic stomps. A hymn to my strength, my victories, my masculinity. No veils, no brides, no festivals. Just Thor the mighty, Thor the fearsome, Thor the... He paused, flexed, then flexed again, as though the muscles themselves were part of the argument. Thor, Sif rolled her eyes. Because nothing screams masculinity like a man rewriting nursery rhymes about himself. From the corner, Loki clapped delightedly, perched on a bench as though it were a theater balcony. Oh, this will be delicious. I can hear it already. Thor, self-proclaimed lyricist of the 9 realms. History will weep. Thor ignored him, or tried to. Destiny, scratching in some invisible ledger, scribbled gleefully. Incident number 22. Thor attempts editorial control. Predictable chaos follows. The rewrite begins. Thor summoned bards from across Midgard and beyond. Lutes, harps, drums, and horns crowded the great hall until it resembled a chaotic music festival. With a mighty slam of Mjolnir on the feasting table, breaking 3 goblets and a servant's nerves, he proclaimed, "From this day forward, you will sing my version, a proper song. Try this." He cleared his throat and recited, Thor the mighty, strong and tall. Hammer smashes giants all. No veils, no brides, no dresses here. Just thunder, strength, and lots of beer. The bards exchanged glances. One coughed discreetly. Another whispered. Not very catchy. Thor slammed Mjolnir again. Make it catchy. The first performance. The bards obeyed. In taverns, markets, and feasting halls across Midgard, they strummed their instruments and sang Thor's revised anthem. The words boomed. The rhythm marched. The hammer verses hit like anvils. And the reaction? Polite, courteous applause. A few respectful nods. Then silence. Because here was a problem. Thor's version had no comedy. No twist. No hook. Mortals respected it. But they didn't love it. It was like replacing mead with lukewarm water. Fine, but who wants to sing about it? Within days, crowds began sneaking back to the old version, laughing in corners, humming under their breath. And then, because mortals are inventive, they combined both. Thus was born the hybrid. Thunder Bride, both strong and bold, smashes giants, feasts on gold, with hammer high and veil so wide. All hail our mighty Thunder Bride. It spread faster than Thor's temper. The accidental upgrade. Thor froze the first time he heard the hybrid sung by an entire village. What have I done? Instead of killing the bridal theme, his attempt had made it stronger. Now the song praised both his strength and his veil. Dignity and absurdity had merged into a masterpiece no bard could resist. Mortals adored it. Elves added haunting harmonies that made it sound oddly beautiful. Dwarves banged anvils to the rhythm in their forges. Valkyries drilled soldiers with a chorus, their battle cries echoing Thunder Bride. As they charged, even Odin hummed it once while half asleep. Thor groaned, slumping over the feasting table, beer dragging in spilled mead. I tried to save my name. Instead, I gave them more material. Loki leaned over, smirking so wide it was practically a second face. Congratulations, brother. You didn't just lose. You expanded the franchise. The prophecy trembles. Far beyond Asgard, on a plain bound by shadows, Gleipnir rattled against Fenrir's rage. The wolf lifted his massive head, ears pricking as a new verse reached even him. His laughter rumbled, shaking roots and stars. Yes, Thor, Fenrir growled. They crown you louder with every verse. They bind you in song as tightly as I am bound in chains. And when I rise, it will not be a bride I devour. It will be the hero buried under laughter. The chain strained. One link glowed red-hot. The stars above flickered nervously. Back in Asgard, Thor sat at the feast table, head in his hands. Odin smirked from a high seat. Frigg covered her mouth to hide her laughter. Sif stroked his shoulder gently, though her lips twitched with amusement. Even the goats had been adorned with tiny veils by mischievous servants. The hall erupted again as a hybrid song rose, voices weaving thunder and laced into one unstoppable anthem. Destiny, ever amused, scribbled. Incident number 22. Thor's rewrite attempt fails. Song evolves. Popularity unstoppable. Thor muttered into his beard, I hate everything. But the chorus drowned him out. Thunder bride, veil so wide. Hammer raised at Asgard's side. Bride or warrior, all the same. The 9 realms roar your mighty name. And louder than thunder, louder than pride, the song echoed across realms, unstoppable as fate. If there is one truth in all the 9 realms, it is this. Loki cannot leave well enough alone. So when Thor's failed rewrite of the Thunder Bride anthem accidentally spawned more verses, Loki clapped his hands and announced, Clearly, this song has outgrown taverns and markets. It needs a stage, a theatrical masterpiece. Thor's beard bristled. Absolutely not. But Loki was already summoning bards, seamstresses, and anyone who could trip dramatically without breaking bones. Within days, he had assembled a troupe of actors. The script? A 3-act tragedy comedy called A Thunder Bride's Triumph. Destiny scribbled gleefully. Incident number 23. Loki weaponizes theater. Thor suffers. Opening night. The golden hall of Asgard was transformed. Lanterns hung from beams. Benches were rearranged into rows. Mortals, gods, and elves squeezed together, eager for the spectacle. Even Odin attended, muttering, Perhaps it will finally teach Thor humility. Thor, meanwhile, sulked in the shadows, muttering, This cannot possibly get worse. Spoiler. It could. Act 1, the bridal feast. The curtain rose. Yes, Loki had ordered a curtain woven overnight by very confused dwarves. On stage, an actor dressed in a long blonde wig and false beard appeared, wearing a glittering veil and holding a papier-mâché hammer. The audience roared with laughter. Behold! The actor boomed in a very poor imitation of Thor's voice. I am Thor the Mighty, also the beautiful bride. Thor leapt to his feet. That is not how I sound. The crowd shushed him. Act 2, the hammer reveal. The second act dramatized the infamous wedding feast with THRYM. Actors pretending to be giants fainted as Thor the bride devoured mountains of food. One giant actor shouted, She eats like thunder. Another wailed, Look at her veil, it glows with lightning. The audience laughed so hard that ale spilled across the benches. Thor muttered, I will smash this entire stage. Loki whispered from behind him, Careful. Do that and it becomes method acting. Act 3, the triumphant smash. The climax featured the bride lifting her hammer high, tearing off the veil, and striking down giants left and right. Actors collapsed dramatically, some flopping twice just to milk applause. The chorus rose. Musical note Thunder Bride, with hammer wide, saves the day with veiled pride. Musical note. And then, as if humiliation weren't enough, Loki himself strutted on stage for finale, playing who else? Thor. He wore an even bigger wig, an even sillier veil, and carried a hammer made entirely of bread. Behold, he cried, Thor, the Thunder Bride, strong in might, stronger in style. The hall nearly collapsed with laughter. The real Thor explodes. That was it. Thor could not take another second. He leapt onto the stage, roaring, "I am Thor the Mighty, not a bride." The audience screamed with delight, assuming it was part of the play. "Encore! Encore!" they shouted. An elf whispered, "His acting is incredible." A dwarf muttered, "The rage feels so authentic." Thor swung Mjolnir, shattering the bread hammer into crumbs. The crowd went wild. He improvised. Genius. By the time Loki took a bow, Thor had accidentally stolen the show. Back in Asgard, when the curtain fell, the applause shook the hall. Actors bowed. Loki basked in glory, and Thor, red-faced, stomped away muttering curses that would have made even the giants blush. But it was too late. The play was an instant success. Requests for performances flooded in from every realm. Mortals begged to host it. Elves offered to translate it into 12 languages. Dwarves began crafting collectible figurines of Thor the Bride. Thor buried his face in his beard. "I hate everything." Destiny scribbled with glee. Incident number 23. The Thunder Bride becomes theater. Thor becomes immortalized in drama. Tragedy for him, comedy for everyone else. And somewhere in the distance, Fenrir laughed, rattling his chains. There are many ways to heal a bruised reputation. Noble deeds, strategic silence, a very long vacation. Thor chose none of these. He chose sabotage. After the premiere of The Thunder Bride's triumph turned his life into dinner theater, Loki did what Loki always does. He took the show on the road. The troupe packed costumes, wigs, a collapsible antler chandelier, safety hazard, also fabulous, and a bread hammer recipe with alarming structural integrity. They departed Asgard to thunderous applause, and one god muttering into his beard, like a storm cloud learning to swear. Thor watched their wagons vanish along the Bifrost and said the words every sensible person dreads. "I'm going to fix this." Sif, who has known both love and migraines, pinched the bridge of her nose. "By talking to them?" "By untalking them," Thor said darkly, which is not a thing. He recruited no allies. Wise people excused themselves, hitched up his goats, and launched Operation Dramatic Cancellation. Stop 1. Alfheim, land of tasteful harmony and excessive harp solos. Loki's troupe had erected a stage beneath luminous trees. Elves filled the grove with cushions, candied petals, and the kind of audience silence that feels expensive. The curtain rose to polite size. Thor the Bride glided out in a veil that glimmered like dew. The lute section sparkled. Thor landed behind the stage with all the subtlety of a falling cathedral. Actors scattered. One, still in giant makeup, shrieked into his papier-mâché boulder like a confetti bomb. Whereas Loki, Thor thundered. The stage manager, an elf with ink on his hands and despair in his soul, gestured weakly toward the wings. He said if a large, furious man asked for him to tell you to break a leg, he checked his notes. "No, wait. Break several legs, preferably ours, because the insurance is excellent." Thor stomped toward the curtain. The chorus swelled. An elf whispered, "Is this immersive theater?" Thor ripped down the curtain. Gasps. Then, the worst thing, applause. "Unexpected fourth wall moment," someone breathed. On stage, Freya Thor gasped through lace. A giant actor fainted in character. Loki, in the role of narrator Destiny, stepped forward in a cloak covered in painted quills and smirked like a man who had been planning this all week, which he had. Behold! Loki cried to the audience. A miracle of theater. The hero himself has blessed our humble show. Thor raised Mjolnir. "I have not." "And he's improvising," Loki purred. "How brave." Elves love bravery when it's tidy. They clapped as if tidiness were occurring. Thor gritted his teeth so loudly the harpist modulated. He swore to end the tour at the next stop. Stop 2, Nidavellir, where the orchestra is all hammers. The dwarves built the troupe a stage out of iron. The set weighed as much as a small keep. Loki sold limited edition rivets to fund an encore. This is capitalism. Please don't write me letters. Thor squeezed through backstage, rigging like a bull through embroidery. He found the prop cart, seized the bread hammer, and bit it in half. "Try acting with crumbs," he snarled. Spraying gluten. A dwarf poked the ruins with the tongs. "We can cast it in steel," he offered helpfully. Thor snarled. Do not help. Right. The dwarf said, already drafting schematics. On stage, the overture started. Clang, clang, clang. The audience stomped in rhythm, mugs of ale sloshing. Thor marched out to announce the show was canceled, and instead found himself in the brightest spotlight ever forged. Loki again, dwarves and deities, a treat. Thor in person, demonstrating the proper way to wield a hammer. A volunteer was dragged up. A blacksmith with forearms like tree roots and the face of a man who has never failed at anything, including growing an enviable mustache. Thor tried to lecture about dignity. The smith asked for tips on wrist rotation. Thor, against his will, gave a small clinic. 10 minutes later, the dwarves were chanting, "Masterclass! Masterclass!" Loki bowed as if he'd taught it. Thor fled to the sound of receipts being counted. Stop 3. Midgard, where theater becomes festival and festival becomes religion. The troops set their stage in a market square ringed by food stalls. Eel on a stick, thunder cakes, copyright disputable, and a booth selling miniature veils for goats. The goats purchased too. Don't ask with whose money. Thor, determined to end this with finality, drafted a plan. It involved smoke, surprise, and smashing the central pulley that held the antler chandelier. He crawled beneath the stage with a coil of rope and a face like Thunder's lawyer. Meanwhile, Loki greeted the crowd in a new costume labeled Executive Producer. "My friends," he called, "tonight's performance includes a never-before-seen twist." Under the stage, Thor located the pulley. He raised Mjolnir and paused, because under the boards he heard children, little feet pattering, little voices practicing lines. "I am the goat," one squeaked. "I faint now." Thor blinked. He peeked through a knothole. A dozen children in paper-beard masks waited eagerly backstage. One, clutching a flour sack hammer, whispered, "Do you think the real Thor ever sees us?" Another answered, "He's probably busy being brave." Thor's heart, a stubborn organ with bad boundaries, made an inconvenient decision. He lowered the hammer. He crawled out from under the stage covered in dust and conflict. On stage, the THRYM actor roared, "Bring the hammer for the wedding blessing." The prop master, ghost pale, mouthed at Loki, "The pulley lives." Loki lifted an eyebrow, clocked Thor's dusty face, and, because he is chaos with cheekbones, changed the plan mid-sentence. "Ladies, gentlemen, goats," Loki cried, "tonight we have a special guest understudy." The spotlight pivoted. It found Thor. "No," Thor said flatly. "Yes," Loki said sweetly. The crowd vibrated like a plucked string. Children in paper beards chanted, "Understudy. Understudy." Thor closed his eyes, did some extremely aggressive breathing, and made another terrible, noble choice. He climbed the steps. Loki tossed him a wig. Thor caught it, stared, and put it on backwards. The audience howled. He tugged it straight, lifted the veil, and for the first time chose a joke instead of letting it choose him. "I am Thor," he boomed, "and tonight I will play Thor." The place exploded. Act 2.5. Method acting by accident. Once committed, Thor committed hard. He ate the feast, the real feast, not the props. Several extras retired after that scene, glared lightning at THRYM, and when the cue came to bless the hammer, he wrapped his fingers around the actual Mjolnir and felt that old chorus of power sing through his bones. The children watched from the wings, eyes enormous. One mouthed, "He's really him." Thor lowered the veil. Then he lifted it. Then he tore it off with a flourish that would have embarrassed peacocks. The audience leapt to their feet. It didn't matter what came next. They had already gotten their miracle. What came next, however, was very good. Thor swung Mjolnir in an arc that flattened the antler chandelier into modern art, stomped a foot so hard the trapdoor popped, and ad-libbed a line that would be quoted for the next 100 years. "I am Thor, son of Odin, bride only of thunder." Even Loki blinked. "Oh," he whispered, delighted. "That's going in the script." He stepped forward for the scripted duel. Thor, drunk on applause and bad choices, decided to play nice and not knock Loki into a pastry cart. They clashed with sparks and sarcasm. Loki shouted, "Yield, O delicate flower!" Thor bellowed, "Taste lightning, you theatrical menace!" A goat wandered on stage and fainted at exactly the right beat. The audience fainted figuratively. Curtain, absolute pandemonium. Flowers flew. Bread hammers flew. Someone threw a real hammer. Thor caught it without looking heroic, then apologized to the stage manager, Growth. After, backstage smelled like sweat, glue joy. Actors mobbed Thor. The child with the flour sack hammer approached with trembling reverence. "My lord," she whispered, "may I keep practicing being you?" Thor looked at Loki, who was practically vibrating with triumph. He looked at the little paper-bearded faces. He looked at the absurd wig in his hand. "Practice being yourselves," he said, and ruffled her paper beard gently. "And eat the feast after the fight." Loki sidled up, all dimples. "So, cast list for tomorrow." "No," Thor said. "We'll list you as guest star." "No, special appearance by Loki." Loki held up both hands. "Fine, one night, but you did it, brother. You chose to laugh. The song is still ridiculous, but now it's yours a little too." Thor didn't answer, which for him is basically a sonnet. He looked out at the dispersing crowd. No malice, just delight. Somewhere, a bard already scribbled a new verse. Musical note, he came on stage, the thunder wide, and claimed at last the joke's bright tide. Not bride, nor groom alone he stood, but thunder's heart and thunder's good. Musical note, back in Asgard that night, Odin listened as ravens reported the scandal. Thor had acted. Frigg smiled into her cup. "About time." Odin grunted, which in father means I will never say I'm proud in public. Tell him anyway. And far away, where Gleipnir held and shivered, Fenrir laughed again. Not kinder, not smaller, but different. "Sing, little gods," the wolf rumbled. "Sing while you can." Thor lay awake on the palace roof. Wig discarded beside him like a slain enemy. The stars ignored him politely. The goat snored. He whispered to no one and everyone. If the song must live, let it carry something true. Below, a child in a paper beard practiced a hammer stance by moonlight. Above, the Norns made a tiny note, and Loki, already rewriting Act 3, wrote around the truth as if it were a jewel he could set without cracking. Destiny, ink-stained and satisfied, closed the ledger half an inch. Incident number 24, sabotage attempted, theater expanded, Thor cast as himself. Dignity wounded but breathing. Tomorrow, the tour would move on. But tonight, for one blessed moment, thunder and laughter shared a stage and did not try to kill each other. It began as a joke. A single, ridiculous verse about Thor in a dress, eating everything in sight at a wedding feast. But now the song had become something else entirely. Mortals sang it at weddings, at harvests, even during funerals' questionable taste. But catchy tunes care little for context. Elves harmonized it into symphonies. Dwarves pounded it into their forges, sparks flying in rhythm. Valkyries drilled their troops to it, shouting the chorus louder than war horns. And the dead? Even Helheim hummed it in hollow voices that rattle bones. Everywhere, across every realm, the Thunder Bride lived. And Thor could not stop it. The final straw. One morning, he awoke to find Odin's ravens perched on the rafters, croaking the melody. Thunder Bride, veil so bright. Thor hurled his pillow at them. Traitors. The ravens croaked the second verse. Thor stormed into the council hall, beard bristling like storm clouds. "Father, enough. This is no longer a song. It is a plague, a prophecy of mockery." Odin leaned on Gungnir, one eye gleaming storm dark. "No, my son. It is prophecy, yes, but not mockery." Thor froze. "What?" Frigg, calm as moonlight, spoke softly. "Do you not see? Every voice that sings your name weaves your thread deeper into fate. Mortals love you. Gods depend on you. Even the dead remember you. When Ragnarok comes, they will not march alone. They will march singing." Thor blinked. "Singing what?" Loki leaned forward, grinning. "Guess." Thor groaned into his beard. "Fenrir hears the song. Far beyond Asgard, In the plain where Gleipnir bound the great wolf, the chain rattled. For months, it had grown at every verse. Now, as the song thundered across the realms, even Fenrir could hear it. The wolf laughed, a sound that split the soil, shook the stars, and made the chain shriek like breaking glass. Yes, little bride of thunder, Fenrir rumbled. They crown you in song. They chain you in laughter. And when I rise, I would devour not only your hand but your legend. For what is louder, thunder or prophecy? The chain snapped one link. Just one. But it was enough to make the roots of Yggdrasil tremble. Destiny, scribbling furiously, muttered. Incident number 25. Thunder Bride enters prophecy canon. Fenrir unimpressed. Universe very amused. The choice. That night, Thor stood alone on the walls of Asgard, Mjolnir heavy in his hand. He watched the stars flicker, listened to faint voices, singing even from Midgard's meadows. He muttered, I am Thor the Mighty. I am not. The wind interrupted him. Thunder Bride. He buried his face in his beard. I hate everything. But then he laughed. Just once. A short, rough laugh, like thunder begrudging a sunrise. Because Frigg was right. The song bound him, yes, but it bound him to everyone. Mortals, gods, even children in paper beards. When Ragnarok came, they would not just shout his name. They would sing it. And maybe, just maybe, that was not weakness. Maybe it was strength in a form Thor had never understood. The curtain falls. So the saga ended not with silence, but with song. Not with dignity reclaimed, but with absurdity embraced. The Thunder Bride had become more than mockery. It had become memory, prophecy, legend. Thor sighed, lifting Mjolnir. Fine. If I must be a bride, then let the wolf whet my hammer. Lightning split the sky. The goats fainted. Loki applauded. And somewhere, Fenrir laughed. Hungry, certain, but just a little unsettled. Because even he could not ignore it anymore. Musical note bride of thunder, veil of flame. Her hammer strikes. Her foes are slain. Through laughter's roar and thunder's pride, all realms remember the Thunder Bride. Musical note. The song rolled across Yggdrasil, unstoppable. Thor muttered the final words of the saga. I really, really hate everything. But the smile beneath his beard said otherwise.